Chapter 942. No matter how powerful Sun Wukong was, he couldn't escape from the palm of the Buddha. In the end, Li Han was still captured. After being forced to sit down at the table, he became much more well-behaved. He lowered his head and asked dispiritedly, "Brother Xian, why are you looking for me?" Since ancient times, speaking was an art. If it wasn't necessary, very few people would go straight to the point. This was a very impolite behavior. After all, he couldn't just wait until Li Han had settled down and ask him if he wanted to be the emperor. "I have a throne for you, do you want to consider it?" The first step should be to be polite and get closer to him. Li Xian handed over a chicken wing that he had just roasted and asked, "Xiao Han, how are things at the Mathematics Institute recently? Are you busy? Are the professors at the Imperial College safe and sound? I heard that you often go to the Women's Institute recently. Do you have a girl you like? Don't be shy, just say it." Brother Xian was like you back then. The Imperial College's mathematics department had been defeated by Li Han fair and square. They had lost face, and the mathematics department had been directly merged into the mathematics department. These people had been thinking about how to raise their heads again and wanted to make the mathematics department independent again. Of course, they had been ruthlessly attacked by Li Han every time. He had already announced that unless those people could defeat him in a fair and square battle, they would have to obediently become subordinates of the Mathematics Academy. There's nothing to worry about those idiots. Li Han shook his head and suddenly blushed. "Brother Xian, who did you hear this from? I don't often go to the Women's Institute. It's just a bunch of troublesome girls, what's there to go?" He actually often went to the Women's Institute. Sister Shanning was as fierce as a tiger cub. She would only become a sheep in front of her teacher. However, He Duanwu, who often played with her, always spoke softly and always gave him delicious food. She was much gentler than Sister Shanning. Li Xian only asked casually and didn't continue the topic. He had already said all the pleasantries and now it was time to get to the main topic. He leaned towards Li Han and asked, "Xiao Han, have you ever thought about being the emperor?" Li Han had already brought the chicken wing to his mouth. He was startled when he heard this and asked curiously, "Big brother Xian, why do you ask?" In his heart, the emperor was his father. The future emperor would definitely be one of his brothers. It had nothing to do with him. He only needed to guard the school of mathematics. When the teacher gave him the position of the dean, he would be the absolute master of the school of mathematics. Although he had almost achieved this, he was still a man. Who didn't want a proper title? Li Xian looked at him and said, "Just tell me if you want to or not." Li Han stared at him with an aggrieved expression. "Brother Xian, I'm still a child." Li Xian's face revealed a trace of anxiety as he said, "It's not like I'm asking you to be one right now. I'll let your eldest royal sister keep an eye on it for now. When you grow up," Li Han gave it some thought and asked, "But what about King Qi and King Xian's royal brothers? They can go back to where they came from." Li Xian waved his hand and asked, "Just tell me, if you were to become the emperor, would you be willing?" "I'm not willing." Li Han replied straightforwardly. He knew how tired his father was in the past. He didn't even have time to play with him. If he became the emperor, how would he manage the school of mathematics? How would he have the time to play with He Duanwu? This was a debt that didn't even need to be calculated. Coincidentally, he was very good at calculating debts. Furthermore, he looked at Li Xian and said, "Father is doing fine as the emperor. Why do you have to ask me, Imperial Father, Imperial Father?" Li Xian opened his mouth, but in the end, he didn't finish his sentence. He snatched the chicken wing from his father's hand, waved his hand and said, "Forget it, it's fine now. Go and play." He lay on the grass and gnawed on the chicken wing as he pondered about life. His uncle had become his father, Her Highness had become his mother, his father had become his uncle, and his mother had become his aunt. Damn it, what the hell was going on? On Mingzhu's side, she should be as distressed as he was. When Li Yi walked into the morning dew palace with a bowl of egg fried rice and a jar of wine, a figure in the back of the palace was waving a long sword in his hand. The sound of the sword whistled. The figure didn't stop until he put down the bowl. After sitting down, he minded his own business and ate. Li Yi filled her cup with wine and sat quietly at the side. I'm fine. The eldest princess's expression was calm. She didn't seem to be affected at all. Li Yi naturally couldn't say what he wanted to say next. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Actually, if it's a princess, it's not bad. At least, it's much easier than the princess or the empress." The eldest princess didn't even raise her head. "What's easier?" "Life is much easier. You don't have to worry about the affairs of the court. Just leave it to Li Xian." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Don't put all the burdens on your shoulders. It's not your responsibility, it's Li Xian's. You should also have your own life. To be honest, unless it's absolutely necessary, I don't want you to take that step. Once you've taken that step, it's very difficult to take it back. I also think it's easier to be a princess." Mingzu raised her cup and said, "Drink with me." Li Yi didn't like to drink, especially this kind of strong wine. Not only because he didn't like the spicy taste, but also because he couldn't hold his liquor well. When he was drunk, it was easy for him to do something out of line, especially in the presence of the opposite sex. If he took advantage of a girl, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. Of course, the person he was drinking with was the eldest princess. The princess should be worried about him. However, today's situation was special. He might as well risk his life to accompany the princess and get drink. Li Yi filled his cup, clinked his cup with hers, and drank the wine in one gulp. His head hurt. Li Yi didn't know how many cups he drank yesterday. After a few cups, he couldn't remember what happened after that. He didn't even know how he came back. After washing his face in the morning, he sat at the dining table. His head was still throbbing. Fortunately, his butt didn't hurt, which meant that nothing embarrassing happened yesterday. The old emperor's tricks were unbelievably deep and completely disrupted their plans. They didn't know whether they should be happy or worried. The matter that the three of them had pushed forward with all their might had such an accident. It was really embarrassing. Young master, Xiao Huan's voice gradually became clearer. Li Yi came back to his senses and tilted his head. Seeing her worried face, he asked, "What's wrong?" "Young master, what's wrong?" The young maidservant's big eyes were full of worry. Li Yi shook his head, "Nothing." "But, the piece of rib in your hand is the one that second miss just ate." Li Yi looked down. No wonder he didn't eat any meat after eating for so long. He thought that the cook had skimped on the ingredients, but it turned out that Mississippi Lu had secretly eaten it. He picked up another piece. Rui put down her chopsticks and looked at him worriedly. "Husband, this piece is the one that the rib that she had eaten was on the table. Why did she have to find an empty plate to put it on? Wasn't that a waste of a plate?" The detergent was free. Li Yi finally found an uneaten rib. Just as he brought it to his mouth, he saw Xiao Huan looking at him curiously. "Young master, do you really not remember what happened yesterday?" Chapter 943. Yesterday. Li Yi's heart tightened, and he asked, "What happened yesterday?" He only remembered that Mingzu was in a bad mood after learning about her parentage yesterday, so he drank a few glasses of wine with her. He didn't remember what happened after that. Could it be that after getting drunk, some primitive impulse was aroused, and he forced himself on her? She couldn't resist, and then the two of them did something indescribable. After thinking about it, it was impossible. After all, there was still a small gap between his strength and Mingzhu's. Even if his strength was a little enhanced after getting drunk, he was probably still not her opponent. However, if she just resisted symbolically and then gave in half-heartedly, this was also impossible. Mingzu was not that kind of person, and he was not that kind of person either. Li Yi rubbed his eyebrows, but still couldn't remember anything. However, looking at the reactions of Xiao Huan and Rui, it should not be a big deal. Young master, when you came back yesterday, you carried Dwainer on your neck and ran around the yard. You also told Dwainer that when he grew up, he should not marry Prince Li Xian's Xiao Rui. You said that if he married Xiao Rui, he would not be able to raise his head for the rest of his life. Dwainer was so scared that he cried. A few black lines appeared on Li Yi's forehead. Was this what he did yesterday? Little Rui was the name of Li Xian's daughter. The name of the heir consort had a heart in it, so he made his daughter's name have 3 hearts in it. This was an act of flattery that couldn't be any lower. When he and Rui's first daughter was born, she would be called Li Si or Li Mui, which was more artistic and meaningful. Si, Mui, Xiao Rui. Just by hearing it, it was obvious who was better. Xiao Huan looked at him and asked curiously, "Young master, what's wrong with Xiao Rui?" Of course, there was nothing wrong with Xiao Rui's father. Although there was only a difference of 1 word between a princess and a princess, the difference was huge. Marrying a princess was called marrying a princess. Marrying a princess was called marrying a princess. Marrying a princess was not marrying a wife. It was like bringing back an ancestor. He would be looked down upon by the world. A good princess would become a princess, and she would be the eldest princess. No one knew better than him how difficult it was to marry the eldest princess. Of course, things would be much easier if the princess became a princess. Xiao Rui is fine. Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm just telling Dwainer, kids shouldn't fall in love at such a young age." Xiao Huan lowered her head, with a soft voice said, "Son-in-law used to not drink outside, when he came back he would hug and kiss eldest Miss, Xiao Huan." Rui blushed and glanced at her. Xiao Huan immediately stopped talking. Li Yi looked at Rui, sighed and said, "Something happened yesterday." He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he only carried Li Duan around the courtyard yesterday and did not do anything else. Hugging and kissing eldest Miss was fine. Rui was his wife, as long as he did not do anything to second Miss. Drinking would cause trouble, and he would try to avoid it in the future. Xiao Huan looked up and asked, "Is it about what son-in-law and second Miss talked about?" Li Yi looked up and stared at her blankly. "What did I talk about with Rui?" "Yesterday, you ran to second Miss' room, closed the door, and chatted with second Miss for a whole 4 hours. Xiao Huan held her chin with one hand, blinked, and asked, "Son-in-law, what exactly did you and second Miss talk about?" Li Yi also wanted to know what he talked about with Mississippi Lu. So he looked at Mississippi Lu. "Nothing. After you went in, you only said a few words, then you lay down and fell asleep." Mississippi Lu put down her chopsticks and said, "I'm full, and the bed sheet reeks of alcohol." Xiao Huan, remember to have someone wash it later. Li Yi finally felt at ease this time. He decided in his heart that he would be a man with good tolerance for alcohol. He would never get drunk again. After breakfast, he took a comfortable bath and felt much more refreshed. Li Yi walked to Mississippi Lu's room, knocked on the door and entered. He looked at Mississippi Lu and said, "Rui, I'm sorry for dirtying your bed yesterday. Do you really think you slept here for 4 hours?" Mississippi Lu looked up at him and asked, "How could I let you go to my bed?" Li Yi was stunned. He just took a bath and cold sweat began to appear again. Then what did we do for the past 4 hours? Li Yi's expression changed. Apart from the bed, there was also a table and chairs. If that was not enough, a blanket on the floor would do. She would not let him sleep on the floor, would she? Mississippi Lu said calmly, "Close the door. I'm an upright person, and I'm not afraid of the shadow. True gold fears no fire, deep roots do not fear the wind, and honest people do not do underhanded things. Li Yi sat down in front of her, clenched his fists, and straightened his body. He looked at the door, adjusted his direction, and asked solemnly, "I didn't do anything guilty that can't be known by others. Why do you close the door? Don't be nervous." Mississippi Lou poured a cup of tea for him. "Speak slowly." Hee, I'm just kidding. Why would I be nervous?" Li Yi picked up the teacup, and the tea in the cup immediately rippled. Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, "Do you know that you have an advantage when you're drunk?" Li Yi shook his head. How would he know what happened when he was drunk? "You won't lie when you're drunk, and you talk a lot." Mississippi Lou's lips curved, and she said, "What do you ask, and what do you say?" Even if you don't ask, you still say it without hesitation. Suddenly, there was a chilly wind in the room. Li Yi took a sip of tea to rehydrate himself. "What did I say?" Mississippi Lou looked at him and asked, "Li Emmingsu can't be the empress anymore." There was no need to hide this from Mississippi Lou, so Li Yi nodded and said, "It's unlikely." If she was the Princess Royal, with the current situation and all obstacles removed, the probability of her ascension to the throne was more than 50%. Of course, if she was only an assistant, the success rate was close to 100%. But now, her status was that of a princess, and it was not legitimate. Once her identity was announced, no matter how high the courtiers' expectations of her were, no matter how much they relied on her, they would not allow a princess to sit on the throne. In fact, thinking about it carefully, this was really the best ending. All the dirty and tiring work was left to Li Xian to do, and Emmingsu did not sit on the throne, and there would be a lot less trouble in the future. This should be something to be happy about. But Mississippi Lou didn't seem very happy. Li Yi looked at her and asked tentatively, "What else did I say?" Mississippi Lou's eyes narrowed slightly, looked at him, and said coldly, "You also said that you have seen many women, many naked women." Slander, naked slander. Except for Rui, Zuamo, and Mississippi Lou herself, he had never seen other women naked. Mississippi Lou was hazy at that time, and she was in the bathtub, so it couldn't be counted at all. Zuamo was just an accident. There were only 2 people in total, and they were all his women. What was wrong with this? "You want to lie to me again?" Li Yi looked at her and said seriously, "I can swear to God, except for that time with you, I have never seen other women naked that I shouldn't see." "Which time?" Second Miss Lou picked up autumn water and thought of something. She gently put it down and looked at him, asking coldly, "Is that so?" "Then tell me, Bo Duo Yi Jie, Big Chiao Wei Zhou, Tian Hai Yi, Tao Tani Satoshi, Li Xiang. Who are these women?" Li Yi put down the teacup, pursed his lips, and looked at her. He asked, "What question did you ask me last night when I was drunk?" Mississippi Lou looked away and said, "I didn't ask. You said it yourself." Li Yi didn't expose her lie. He sighed and said, "Can the words of a drunk person be trusted? Think about it, Pado Kid, Zue Mo, Amami, Jing Kingdom, and Qi Kingdom. Are there people with such strange names around us? What about Li Xiang? What else do you have to explain?" "This." Li Yi looked at her and explained, "Tao Tani and Li Xiang are actually the same person, you really don't know them?" Li Yi looked at her eyes and said, "I swear, in this world, without them, it's even more impossible for me to know them." Mississippi Lou looked at him and didn't see any signs of lying in his eyes. Li Yi, on the other hand, was slightly terrified. 4 hours, 240 minutes, 14,400 seconds. She even knew about Li Xiang. How many questions did she ask him? What else did she not know? Li Yi looked at her and asked cautiously, "What else did I tell you?" A meaningful smile appeared on Mississippi Lou's face. "Why don't you take a guess?" Chapter 944. Mississippi Lou didn't smile often, but when he saw her smile, not only did Lee not feel like a spring breeze, but he felt a chill all over his body. The more she said so, the more uncertain he was in his heart. As the old saying goes, people respect each other because of virtue, people make friends because of affection, people follow because of righteousness, people believe because of sincerity. As the old saying goes, I reflect on myself 3 times a day. Am I disloyal to others? Do I not believe in my sister-in-law? Do I not learn from others? This more or less mentioned the integrity or frankness in interpersonal relationships. But as the old saying goes, people should keep a certain safe distance from each other. It was necessary to communicate with others, but even if they were husband and wife, they still needed to leave a certain amount of private space. If there were no secrets between them, it was tantamount to standing naked in front of each other all the time, and they would definitely feel uncomfortable in their hearts. Lee now felt that he was standing naked in front of Mississippi Lou, and he was being scanned by her invasive eyes unscrupulously. 4 hours. Only God knows what she had asked and what he had said to her. This was taking advantage of someone's perilous state, this was looting a burning house, this was an extremely immoral act. How could she do this? Lee looked away and said, Don't look at me like that. I'm not afraid of ghosts knocking on the door if I haven't done anything wrong. Mississippi Lou looked at him with a faint smile and asked, I didn't say anything. What are you afraid of? Lee's face became serious. Although he was often bullied by Mississippi Lou, he never took it to heart. But this time, she really went a little too far. He looked at Mississippi Lou and asked calmly, Since I said so much last night, did I tell you about that thing? Seeing that Lee's expression was unprecedentedly serious, Mississippi Lou's face also became dignified. She asked, What thing? Let me tell you. Lee suddenly held her hand and said, I like you. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. Lee could clearly feel the expression on Mississippi Lou's face freeze, and a trace of panic flashed across her beautiful eyes. Then, she quickly withdrew her hand that he was holding. She looked at Lee and forced herself to calm down. She clenched her fists and said, If you keep talking nonsense like this, I might hit you. Even if you beat me to death, Lee looked at her and said, It won't change the fact that I like you. I've read many books, but the one I like the most is you. Lee continued to look into her eyes and said, I know this is wrong. I like you without permission. I'm sorry, but no one can control this kind of thing. Are you done? Mississippi Lou's expression became calm. She looked at him and said lightly, After last night, you no longer have any secrets with me. Do you think I will believe what you said? Being exposed in front of him, Lee naturally couldn't pretend anymore. He walked out of the room gloomily. However, he felt much more relaxed in his heart. It was obviously a lie to say that he no longer had any secrets with her. If she really knew all his secrets, how could she not know that what he said just now was not a single lie? It was a clumsy trick that couldn't be any clumsier. The only strange thing was that she didn't choose to hit him directly. It seemed that her temper had been much more restrained these days. If it was in the past, she would have torn himself and the table apart. In the room, Mississippi Lou calmly retracted her hand from the corner of the table and put the broken corner on the table. She picked up a cup of tea, and circles of ripples immediately rippled in the teacup. Outside the door, as soon as Lee walked out, a voice slowly came from behind him. What you said to Rui just now, I have never heard of it before. He turned around and saw Rui standing on the other side, walking towards him. She looked at Lee, shook her head and said, Don't always bully Rui, husband. If you make her angry, I can't stop her. When that time comes, I'm afraid that you will suffer again. Lee was very disappointed. It was Mississippi Lou who bullied him first. He only fought back a little, but Rui actually asked him to give in to her and not bully her. In all honesty, did she need him to give in to her? Moreover, she was a guru, how could she not stop Mississippi Lou? Her elbow was pointing outwards. No, she didn't know whether it was towards the inside or the outside. They were all a family, and they should focus on the vulnerable. Her sister was related, but her husband was not. Moreover, those words that were used to flirt with girls were obviously not said by a decent person. What was she envious of? The words that they usually said secretly in the boudoir were much more inappropriate. Feeling indignant, he went out of the house and went straight to the palace. He was still a little worried about Emingsu. After all, he had experienced this kind of melodramatic life experience. Emingsu was different from him, and her feelings must be more complicated and uncomfortable. When he walked into the morning dew hall, he found that Sing Shichen was also there. Emingsu sat on the top and said, "These days, those gossips in the court, stop them from spreading." The gossips in the court were naturally about the matter of Prince Jean inheriting the throne and Princess Royal continuing to take over the government. He was indeed the one who pushed this matter forward. Now that the momentum had been formed with great difficulty, Her Highness wanted to stop it. Sing Shichen was stunned when he heard this, and couldn't help but say, "Your Highness, there is no need to discuss this matter anymore." Emingsu waved her hand and said, "If there is nothing else, you can leave first." "Your Highness. Your Highness." Sing Shichen looked up and could only bow and leave. When he came, he was full of enthusiasm, but when he left, his mind was heavy. He naturally saw Li Yi who came in. When he passed by, he whispered, "I will wait for you at Zumo's place." Li Yi looked at him and nodded slightly. An unexpected turn of events had occurred, and they needed to give him a good explanation. Li Yi walked over and looked at Emingsu. He thought for a moment and asked, "Yesterday." Emingsu looked up at him and said, "You'd better not drink in the future." Li Yi thought for a moment and couldn't help but ask, "I didn't do anything to you yesterday, did I?" Seeing that Princess Royal was looking at him with a strange look, he immediately changed his words and said, I didn't say anything that I shouldn't have, right?" Emingsu looked at him and asked, "Which one are you referring to?" Li Yi was very curious. He had heard about losing a part of his memory when he was drunk, but how many cups did he drink yesterday? He looked at Princess Royal and asked, "Why didn't you persuade me yesterday?" Emingsu looked at him and said, "I thought it was interesting when you were drunk, so I made you drink a few more cups." It seemed that after two people got along for a long time, their personalities would indeed be a little affected by each other. At least this was the case for Mississippi Lou and Princess Royal. She used to be such a pure and kind real princess, but now... He didn't know if he took the opportunity to take advantage of her or something after he got her drunk yesterday. Emingsu looked at him and said, "I will remember what you said yesterday." Li Yi asked nervously, "What did I say?" Emingsu handed him a cup of tea and said, "You said that if I was tired of my current life, I would go and find you." Li Yi nodded. As a friend, it was normal for him to say that. "You also said, at that time." Li Yi's heart trembled and he asked, "At that time, what?" A palace maid came in from outside and said, "Your Highness, His Highness and Princess Consort are here." Li Yi actually wanted to ask what else he said yesterday. It was very likely that the last sentence was the main point, but Prince Ning had come. At the most inappropriate time, he could only stand up and greet him. Princess Consort Ning walked to Emingsu and explained, "I came to the palace to visit your father and passed by here, so I came to take a look." Before yesterday, Li Yi would have thought that this was a very normal sentence. But now, including Princess Consort Ning's expression and eyes when she looked at Emingsu, everything was so full of loopholes. Emingsu had just left the court and was wearing the court clothes. Princess Consort Ning accompanied her to change clothes. "Prince, sit." Li Yi invited Prince Ning to sit down and poured tea for him. Prince Ning raised his head and looked at him with a trace of surprise and confusion in his eyes. The relationship between him and County Marquis Li was not strange, but it was not familiar either. Although he appreciated him very much in his heart, County Marquis Li always had a faint alienation and resistance to him, a prince, and kept him thousands of miles away. This time, for some reason, he was especially enthusiastic. Chapter 945. Li Yi sat down across from Ning Wang and casually asked, "When do you plan to return to Qing and Fu after coming to the capital this time?" Ning Wang took a sip of tea and said, "There are still some things I haven't taken care of. I might have to wait until after next year's court conference." Li Yi nodded. At this court conference, the local officials would all gather in Jingdou. All the princes would also return to the capital. It was indeed a good opportunity to announce that matter. Ning Wang put down his teacup and looked at him. He suddenly asked, "The court conference is still early. All the princes have returned to the capital. Since you are the Minister of Honor, you should be familiar with the affairs of the court. The Eastern Palace has not been established yet. Who do you think will be the Emperor's princes?" Li Yi looked at him with a smile on his face and didn't speak. Keep pretending, keep pretending. This matter had clearly been planned by him and the old emperor's brother. Right now, he was acting like he didn't know anything at all. If it weren't for Li Xian, the shameless spy who liked to peek at people talking, all of them would have fallen into their trap. Ning Wang's gaze was slightly strange. He asked, "Why are you laughing? Matters of the Eastern Palace should be decided by the emperor alone. As officials, we really shouldn't speak carelessly. However, I feel that, at the latest, by this year's court conference, the emperor should have made a decision." Li Yi, who had changed into a new set of clothes, walked out. After saying something that seemed to have a deeper meaning, he raised his hands to Ning Wang and rose to leave. For now, he was still an outsider, so he wouldn't disturb their family reunion. When the eldest princess saw him out of the hall, Li Yi paused in his steps. He lowered his voice and asked, "Yesterday, I said that when you get tired of it, you can come find me, and then?" The eldest princess, who had already walked to the door of the hall, paused and then turned. There was a smile on her face that Li Yi had never seen before. "Why don't you guess? Guess your sister. Where did you learn all these bad habits? You're the same as Lu Rui." Li Yi turned around and strode away without looking back. As a man, once a word was spoken, it was impossible to go back on it. Words that were spoken were like water that had been spilled. Even if it was said under the influence of alcohol, he had to be responsible for it. Thinking about it, Mingsu would not simply fabricate something to deceive him at that time. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if she made it up, there would be a limit. She couldn't possibly tell him that after he got drunk yesterday, he said, "When you're tired of me, come find me, I'll marry you, right?" There was no such thing. When he walked out of the palace gates and arrived at the Tsing Manor, Tsing Shichen was already waiting for him. Why did His Highness suddenly say those words? What did he mean? What exactly happened? Before Li Yi and Zui Mo could speak, Tsing Shichen stood up and asked impatiently. After coming out of the palace, he was full of shock and confusion. There was no turning back. This matter involved a lot of people. Once it started, there was no turning back. Her Highness's words just now would cause all the efforts they had made these days to go down the drain. He was shocked and anxious. It was already very difficult for him to endure until now. Li Yi sat down, picked up the teacup, and said, "It's what you understand." Tsing Shichen was stunned and suddenly said, "Did things change?" Li Yi stretched out his hand and gestured for him to sit down. Then he said, "Don't worry, the final result may be better. You can rest assured, and let them rest assured." Some things could not be said clearly, but for a smart person like Tsing Shichen, it was enough to say this much. Tsing Shichen did not ask any more. After thinking for a while, he said in a low voice, I understand. If he understood, he should go back quickly. These days, the Ministry of Revenue and the capital governor's residence were not busy. As the boss of the two departments, he actually had the free time to sit here and drink tea. If people saw him, they would think he was slacking off again. Of course, they were all polite people, and he could not speak so bluntly. Li Yi pointed to the teapot and said, there should be no business in the yamen. It's still early. Would Lord Tsing like another cup of tea? Tsing Shichen nodded. Thank you, Lord Li. He had completely forgotten the traditional virtues of 5,000 years, and he had also lost the face of his ancestors. He did not even have this little bit of insight. How did he sit in the position of the capital governor? Yes, if he had not gone through the back door with Her Highness, the Tsing family would have been in prison like the Chui family, not to mention the capital governor. Then, Li Yi realized that this scene seemed familiar. He should have remembered that Tsing Shichen was such a blind person. Even the thought he had just had was not the first time he had thought about it. People would always fall at a certain place, stand up, and fall a second time, a third time. After waiting for Tsing Shichen to leave, Li Yi turned around and asked Zuemo, it's been so long. Your wedding dress is almost done, right? The Luo Shui goddess glanced at him. Soon, soon. Why are you in such a hurry? On the side, Xiao Chui opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. After being glared at by the Luo Shui goddess, she immediately closed her mouth. Li Yi looked at her and said seriously, by the end of this year at the latest, if you are not ready by then, I will take you back. Taking a woman in broad daylight. Tsing Zuemo looked at him with disdain and said, Lord Li, you are the head of the Mathematics Academy, a doctor, a county marquis, not a robber. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by the whole capital? There's one thing you're wrong about. Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, what doctor, what county marquis, these are all my part-time jobs. In fact, my real job is, really a robber. He picked her up by the waist and put her on his shoulder. Ignoring her panicked patting on his back, he strode into the room. When he walked in, he looked back and said, Xiao Chui, close the door. Got it. Xiao Chui ran over excitedly and closed the door. Then, she sat in the corridor with a silly smile on her face. This time, she didn't put her ear on the door to eavesdrop because she knew that even if she did, she wouldn't hear anything. However, at the end of the year, she might be able to hear it. She was happy but also worried. The little servant girl named Xiao Huan and Li's family was very favored. If she went there, would she be bullied? If Xiao Zhu went with her, the two of them shouldn't be afraid of her. Miss was also alone. If Sister Ruoqing went with her, that would be the best. There would be no difference from now. When Li Yi saw Li Xian again, it was already 3 days later. His clothes were disheveled and he looked haggard. 2 dark circles hung on his face, which was especially conspicuous. He looked like a frosted eggplant. He sat opposite Li Yi and gulped down a pot of tea. Looking into his eyes, he asked seriously, can I really not escape? Li Yi nodded his head. As the heir of Ning Wang, he could escape many things. But as the crown prince, as the emperor, he had to bear what he had to bear. Li Xian lay on the chair in frustration, damn it. Who are you scolding? Li Yi looked at him and asked, Ning Wang or His Majesty? Li Xian sighed, scolding me. Li Yi could not empathize with his situation, but he could understand it very well. Li Xian wasn't a person suitable to be the emperor. That position, to him, was only a restraint, only a burden. What he yearned for was a bigger and more open sky, a sky that no one in this world had ever seen before. Thinking about how he would be the emperor, it was unimaginable. Say, can I tell Imperial Father that I don't want to be the emperor and let Li Han be, he's still a child. Then say, Can it be like what we originally planned, me being the emperor and handing over the court to Mingzhu, just like now, with Mingzhu's influence in the court and among the people? Aren't you afraid that she will really become the empress and make you a mere figurehead for the rest of her life, or even just abolish you and ascend the throne herself? Li Xian's eyes showed yearning as he muttered, that would be the best. At the beginning, didn't we also think that way? Li Yi thought for a moment, then looked at him and said, you wish. Chapter 946. Perhaps it had snowed a lot last winter, but there was no snow in the capital until the beginning of December this year. Of course, although there was no snow, the weather was very cold. The proud Lolita and Yongning wrapped themselves up tightly, only revealing a pair of large, watery eyes. Brother. Yongning had caught a cold a few days ago and had been recuperating in the palace. Only when she recovered was she allowed to leave the palace. Just as she walked to the door, she saw Li Yi. She opened her arms and quickly ran over. Perhaps it was because she was wearing too much, she accidentally tripped when she crossed the steps. Li Yi's figure flashed, and just as she was about to fall, he picked her up. He touched her nose and said, be careful. The proud Lolita walked over and raised her head to look at Li Yi. She said pitifully, sir, it's so cold. I want to drink some soup to warm myself up. Li Yi used his hand to cover her ears and said, it's cold outside. Let's go in first. The inside and outside of the house were two completely different worlds. After the two girls went in, they immediately took off their outerwear. Li Yi hung up their clothes and inadvertently glanced at the proud Lolita who had taken off her shoes and climbed onto the bed. He felt that there was no need for her to drink soup. Li Duan, who was more than 1 year old, could already walk steadily. Even though he could not walk fast, he could consciously speak some simple words. The two princesses and Xiao Huan were playing cards on the bed. He just sat quietly at the side and did not cry or make a fuss. She did not know if it was because her son was naturally obedient or because Mississippi Lu was by his side. Li Yi lifted the heavy curtain and walked out the door. He looked at the gray sky, rubbed his hands, and walked to the kitchen. It was another year of court session. In the 12th month, officials from various places started to enter the capital. In some remote places, the officials who had entered the capital earlier had already arrived. Of course, the ones who arrived the fastest were the nobles who had been enfeoffed outside. Ever since the weather turned cold in the 11th month, the old emperor's health had been deteriorating. The atmosphere in the court and palace was also as oppressive as the gray sky. During this period of time, the princes used all sorts of means. In the eyes of outsiders, the fight for the throne would most likely end up in the hands of either Prince Qi or Prince Xan. A small portion of the officials in the imperial court had already started to show signs of taking sides. Ever since Prince Jin succeeded the throne and the eldest princess' call for governance died down, no one mentioned it in the past few months. They needed to make plans for themselves and their clans. Li Yi continued to lead a leisurely life. If there were any difficult matters in the court, the eldest princess would take the initiative to come over. After discussing it with him, she would have an in-depth discussion with Mississippi Lu, and at the same time, she would freeload a meal. After eating and drinking to her heart's content, she would leave in satisfaction. The matters of the Mathematics Academy had all been handed over to Li Han. He planned that after this year, he would completely hand over the position of the headmaster to him. The Mathematics Academy was already in a good state. What was going to happen next was just a cycle that would repeat itself step by step. The winter of Jinghe 4th year was not pleasant. It was dry and cold with no snow, and there were frequent chills. It was not just Yongning. Ruoqing had also caught a slight cold 2 days ago. Although she was feeling better now, she still had some symptoms of coughing. Li Yi cooked some pears with rock sugar and placed them in a thermos cup to bring over. Pushing open the door of the courtyard, Xiao Cui and Xiao Zhu were playing shuttlecock in the yard. Li Yi asked casually, Xiao Zhu, where is Ruoqing? Xiao Zhu was playing shuttlecock. In such a cold weather, there were fine beads of sweat on her forehead. She must have been playing for a long time. She did not raise her head and said, Miss is in the room. Li, you can go and find her yourself. Li Yi walked through the moon door and walked to the corridor. Ruoqing's door was closed. She should be resting. The thermos cup could keep her warm for a long time. Li Yi did not disturb her immediately. He pushed open another door, walked straight into Zui Mo's room, and put the things on the table. Looking at the bed, he found that she was still sleeping. It was not early. Even if it was a lunch break, she should have gotten up. Li Yi walked over and said, Get up, the sun is shining on your butt, you still sleep. The person on the bed was motionless. If you don't get up, I will go up. Li Yi said as he walked to the bedside. Seeing that there was still no movement from the bedside, he first rubbed his hands to warm them, then reached under the quilt, reached under her neck, and put one hand through her legs, carried her horizontally, kissed her gently on the neck, and whispered, Get up. Sister Ruoqing, are you awake? Drink some hot water. Hearing the voice, Li Yi turned his head and saw Zui Mo walking in from outside the door. He only felt a little confused. To Zui Mo. He lowered his head. He did not know when the woman in his arms had changed from Zui Mo to Ruoqing. Her back was originally facing him. When he picked her up, he only cared about kissing her and did not pay attention to her face. Her eyelashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. There was still a trace of confusion in her eyes. She looked up at Li Yi, and a smile appeared on her face. She reached out and put her hand on Li Yi's face, murmuring, Is it another dream? Zui Mo stood at the door, looking straight at him and asked, What are you doing? Holding Ruoqing in his arms, Li Yi looked at Zui Mo and murmured, What am I doing? Come here. Zui Mo glared at him and turned to walk outside. Li Yi looked down at Ruoqing and said with a bitter smile, I didn't do it on purpose. At this moment, Ruoqing naturally knew that this was not a dream. Blushing slightly, she explained, It doesn't matter. The room here is warmer. These 2 days, she has let me sleep here. She looked outside and said, I'm fine. Go and explain to her quickly. Li gently put her down and tucked her in. He took the soup bowl and scooped a bowl of soup. This is rock sugar snow pear soup, he said, it has a secret recipe from the palace. Drink a little, very soon you won't be coughing anymore. When he walked to another room, Zui Mo was already sitting in front of the bed waiting for him. Li Yi explained, I just thought Ruoqing was you. I know. Zui Mo looked at him and nodded. I asked Sister Ruoqing to sleep in my room. It's not your fault. It was good to have a reasonable other half. When there was a misunderstanding, there was no need to explain so much. Actually, even if it wasn't a misunderstanding, and you really wanted to hug Sister Ruoqing, I wouldn't be angry. When Li Yi walked over, she suddenly raised her head and said, You should marry Sister Ruoqing too. I know you like her too. Anyway, marrying one is marrying two is also marrying. I'll help you persuade her. She likes you no less than me. I'll persuade her. She will definitely agree. It was good that the other half was reasonable, but if it was too reasonable, there must be a trap. The reason Li Yi could live well until now was that he was used to all kinds of tricks and would not fall into such a clumsy trap. Li Yi frowned and said, What nonsense are you talking about? You. Zui Mo looked at him and said seriously, I'm not talking nonsense. She, and you started earlier than me. She liked you earlier. I stole the person she likes. I'm sorry for her. Acting was a piece of cake for her and Ruoqing. Li Yi naturally would not be fooled by the surface. He shook his head and said, "Don't think too much all day. I peeked at Sister Ruoqing's diary. I know how she feels about you. I know how much she likes you." Speaking of the diary, memories that were almost forgotten surfaced, and Li Yi's heart began to tangle again. Zui Mo looked up at him and asked, "You know all this too, right?" Li Yi was silent. Zui Mo looked at him and said slowly, "Sister Ruoqing has suffered so much. You cannot let her down." Li Yi took a deep breath and looked at her. He said seriously, "I have never thought of letting her down, nor have I thought of letting you down." "Good. You really have such thoughts. You have always been thinking about Sister Ruoqing, you." As soon as Li Yi's voice fell, a slender hand climbed up his ear. Zui Mo looked at him like an angry little tiger. Besides anger, her face was full of disappointment and regret. Li Yi was stunned on the spot. Could this be a series of traps, a trap within a trap? However, the hand that was pinching his ear did not exert any force. Her face instantly changed from disappointment and regret to a smile. She asked, "Look, did I act well? I can even sing on stage, right?" Li Yi's face turned from white to red and then to green. He looked at her and gritted his teeth. "Yes. Like a demon." He picked up the demon by the waist, threw her on the bed, and immediately pounced on her. Then there was a series of smacking sounds. "I'll let you act. Act on stage. I'll let you act again. You are the biggest bad guy in the world." After a moment, she leaned against Li Yi's chest and rubbed her butt with some grievance. She murmured, "You bad guy, if you let us down, I will bite you to death." Hiss. Li Yi sucked in a breath and said in pain, "You can't bite that place." Chapter 947. Li Yi ran out of the room, covered his chest and ran away, like a good girl who was molested by a hooligan. The hooligan was naturally the goddess of Luo Shui. Under his training, the current her was less and less mindful of the distance between the two of them. In the courtyard, Xiao Chui widened her eyes, even forgetting that she was kicking the shuttlecock. The shuttlecock fell to the ground, causing Xiao Zhu to laugh without caring about her manners. "You lost, you have to lend me that hairpin to wear for 3 days. We are good sisters, what is mine is yours. If you like it, I will give you that hairpin." Xiao Chui turned her head to look at her, curled her lips and said, "But this does not mean that I can't kick you. If not fully scaring me, I can still keep on kicking." Just now, when she saw Li Yi run out while covering his chest, she was extremely puzzled. Could it be that her young Mrs. Temper was actually so impatient? After so many years, she still couldn't see it. She sighed in her heart. If Xiao Zhu wanted that hairpin, she could just give it to her. Why did she have to play this kind of senseless game with her, causing her to miss that wonderful scene? Inside the room, Li Yi put the bowl that Ruoqing used to the side. He took a pillow and let her lean behind him, so that she wouldn't feel uncomfortable sitting down. Then, he sat down beside her and asked, "Do you feel better?" She nodded her head, "Much better." Li Yi reached out his hand and touched her smooth forehead. It was no longer hot, just a little cough and weak body. She would recover after a few days of rest. Li Yi helped her pull up the quilt and said, "These few days, you should rest well at home. Don't go anywhere. Tomorrow, I will continue to send you medicine. You will be fine in 2 days." Because of the relationship between Shanning and Emingzu, the family never lacked good things from the palace. They could also use the secret prescriptions of the imperial physicians. Last time, when Xiao Huan coughed, Emingzu had the imperial physician send over a prescription. She almost recovered on the same day. Wan Ruoqing didn't refuse and just nodded obediently. On the contrary, Li Yi was somewhat puzzled. She was usually polite to everyone. Every time he wanted to do something for her, she was always worried that it would trouble him and refused in every way possible. This time, she was actually so obedient. However, it's better for girls to be obedient. Obedient girls are likable. Disobedient girls, like Mississippi Lou, are likable too. Of course, he didn't know that the two rooms were adjacent to each other and had opposite layouts. If there wasn't a wall beside the beds in the two rooms would be connected. And this wall was only made of wooden planks. In the past, when she and Zuemo slept in separate rooms, they could hear each other even if they whispered through the wall at night. They often used this method to chat late into the night. Li Han walked to Li Xian's side and asked mysteriously, "Brother Xian, did the teacher really say that I'll be the dean after the new year? He should be at your eldest royal sister's place now. You can ask him yourself and you'll know." Li Xian walked slowly into the hall, took out something from his arms, and said with a smile, "Uncle Huang, the Academy of Sciences has developed a kind of ingenious gadget. It's very interesting. I'll show it to you." Li Han scratched his head. He naturally didn't dare to ask in person. Although the teacher was usually unbelievably kind, those nightmarish feelings in the past were still very vivid to him when he recalled them. It took a lot of courage to ask him this kind of thing. Emperor Jing, who was leaning against the wall, did not speak. Ning Wang raised his eyes to look at him and said, "I have told you before that these obscene techniques are unorthodox. You should read more about the classics and history. It is the proper way to govern a country." "Father, you're wrong." Li Xian smiled and said, "Heavenly punishment is not a way to govern a country. The water wheels that cover the outskirts of the capital during a drought are also not a way to govern a country. The new plows that the common people use to farm are also not a way to govern a country. But who dares to say that they are unorthodox?" Prince Ning naturally couldn't refute this sentence. Celestial punishment was an important tool of the country, and it was used to deter strong enemies. The latter two were also a great way to promote the people's livelihood. If anyone dared to say that these were unorthodox, he would be drowned by the spittle of the world. Moreover, there are specializations in every field. In terms of the way to govern a country, I'm not as good as County Marquis Li. In terms of martial arts, I'm not as good as Emingsu. But in terms of the way of science, Li Xian couldn't go on because he really couldn't say that Li Yi was far inferior to him in the way of science. In terms of the way to govern a country, on martial arts, on the way of science, it seemed that he was not as good as him. This was really a sad thing to do. He coughed a few times and said, "What's more, County Marquis Li once said that science and technology are the foundation of a strong country, and it is also the long-term stable development strategy of the Jing Kingdom. Those governing strategies in the court are not as important as the research of the Academy of Science." Xian is right. Emperor Jing nodded. Although his voice was weak, his tone was unquestionable. There are thousands of ways, and the strategy of every emperor is very different. How is it not the way to govern a country to prosper with science and technology? He took the thing that Li Xian had just handed over and looked at it carefully. At least, from the current point of view, Xian's approach is right. The Jing Kingdom can't do without the officials who govern a country, and it can't do without the Academy of Science. Uncle Emperor is wise. Li Xian smiled and immediately said, "I don't know much about governing a country, and I can't do it well. Fortunately, there is Emingsu. These things can be handed over to Emingsu. I only know these unorthodox ways." Emperor Jing raised his head and looked at Prince Ning. However, Li Xian took out a small box from his bosom and walked to the Empress. He smiled and said, "Your Highness, the craftsmen of the Academy of Science have mastered a new technique a few days ago. They can make gold and silver as thin as cicada wings. I asked them to make a phoenix hairpin for you. See if you like it." He took out the hairpin from the box. The hairpin was made very delicately. Because it was very thin, there was no movement when he held it in his hand, but the phoenix feather at the end trembled slowly. It was lifelike and beautiful. A look of surprise appeared on the Empress' face, but she didn't take the hairpin. Instead, she held Li Xian's hand and said, I like it, I like it. As long as it's from Xian, your highness will like it. Princess Ning coughed lightly and said, do you only have your highness in your eyes, and not me, your mother? Li Xian walked over with some flattery and took out another box from his bosom. He said, of course, Xian, I can't forget mother, morning dew hall. The princess ate the egg-fried rice and asked with some doubt, why is the rice they made with the same ingredients and the same steps different from yours? Maybe they didn't put in the effort, Li Yi said casually. If the same ingredients and steps could make delicious food with the same taste, then what was the use of those world-class chefs? Heat control, time, frequency of stir-frying, there were many tricks involved. It wasn't something that others could master. Besides, when those imperial chefs made the egg-fried rice, did they put so much love into it? Putting aside the love egg-fried rice, Li Yi thought of another matter. He looked at her and said seriously, in the future, you have to be careful of Li Xian. Mingzu looked up at him with doubt in her eyes. He is still a crown prince now. Li Yi explained, when he becomes the emperor in the future, it will be much easier for you to be the empress. You have to guard against him, be careful not to be betrayed by him, Uncle Huang, what Xian said is true. When it comes to governing a country, Li Yi and Mingzu are much more proficient than me, especially Li Yi. He actually knows everything, but he is lazy. Only when Mingzu looks for him, he will say. Li Xian thought for a while and said, a minister of nobility can't restrain him. If he is made prime minister, he can't be lazy anymore. With the two of them working together, there is no problem that our Jing kingdom can't solve. Li Xian was very excited. Emperor Jing smiled and looked at him. He suddenly said, since Xian knows, you still won't call me imperial father. Li Xian's expression froze and his voice stopped abruptly. Chapter 948. Li Yi felt that he needed to remind Mingzu to be wary of Li Xian. In order not to become an emperor, he would do anything. He might even betray Mingzu in the blink of an eye. Just as he said this, he saw Li Han walk in from outside. He walked to his side and whispered, Sir, are you going to give me the position of the Dean of the School of Mathematics? Li Yi looked at him and asked, who said that? Although the position of Dean would be given to him sooner or later, he could not take it before he said it. This was like the throne. Once he said it, it would not be giving up the position, but usurping it. Li Han was stunned and did not know how to answer for a moment. Li Yi looked at him and asked, do you think that you are very powerful and qualified to be the dean? No, do you think that you know a lot about mathematics? Just a little, a little. You are modest. Li Yi crossed his arms and said, I will test you on a few questions. If you can answer them, I will give you the position of dean. Although Li Han was young, he still knew his place. If mathematics was compared to a mountain, he could only be considered to be halfway up the mountain. The people from the Imperial College of Mathematics were at the foot of the mountain. As for Sir, he had to look up at the top of the mountain from time to time. He could not see clearly in the clouds. Seeing that Li Han's first reaction was to shake his head, Li Yi added, don't worry, you have learned it before. It will not be beyond the scope. Li Han's expression was serious and he said, Sir, please ask the question. Li Yi looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. This kid, how long has he been thinking about the position of the Dean of the School of Mathematics? 1 rooster is worth 5 coins, 1 hen is worth 3 coins, 3 chicks are worth 100 coins to buy 100 chickens. How much are the rooster, hen, and chicks? Chicken wing 4, chicken hen 18, chicken chick 78, chicken wing 8, chicken hen 11, chicken chick 81, chicken wing 12, chicken hen 4, chicken chick 84. Li Han immediately said the answer. It was the simplest equation of 3 variables. When the teacher came up with the question, he didn't even know how to change the numbers. This question was a must-memorize question for the students of the College of Mathematics. As the acting dean, he had already memorized it by heart. Today, the wall is 5 feet thick. 2 mice can pass through it. The big mouse grows 1 foot a day, the small mouse grows 1 foot. The big mouse grows twice as much as the small mouse grows half as much. When will the 2 mice meet? The 3rd day. Li Han gave his answer in the same instant. He thought that the teacher would give him a difficult question for the second question, but he did not expect it to be a question that he had seen before. Furthermore, it was the simplest question. There should be another question after the original question, which asked how many times the 2 mice would wear. If the questions were asked at the same time, he might have to think about it. What's 80,000 times 90,000? 720,000. After Li Han easily answered the 3rd question, he was already sure that the teacher really wanted to give the position of dean to him. The so-called examination was just a process. Otherwise, why would he always give this kind of free marks? Li Yi rubbed his head and said with a smile, "The study of mathematics is broad and profound. Remember not to be arrogant and conceited." Go back. When Ning Wang accompanied Ning Wang Fei into the main hall, he just happened to see Li Han walk out. Seeing his dejected appearance, Ning Wang Fei asked with concern, "Little Han, what's wrong? Did someone bully you?" "No, no one bullied me. It's because I'm too stupid." Even the simplest calculation could be wrong, and he still wanted to be the dean. Li Han shook his head. He endured the shame in his heart and left with his head lowered. Mingzu, seeing that Ning Wang Fei had been looking at Mingzu with tears in her eyes ever since she walked in, Li Yi knew what he had to do. He stood up and cupped his hands. "Your Highness Ning Wang, Your Highness Wang Fei, this junior will leave first." At the same time, in a certain hall, the Empress held Li Xian's hand and also had tears in her eyes. Emperor Jing looked at Changde beside him and slowly said, "Summon the 2 prime ministers, the head of the secretariat, the attendant, and the 6 ministers to the palace." Changde stood with his hands by his side and respectfully said, "This old servant obeys." The 2 prime ministers, the head of the secretariat, the attendant, and the 6 ministers. Every one of them was a high-ranking official who could shake the court with a stamp of their feet. When the emperor summoned 1 or 2 of them alone, no one would think too much. However, when the emperor summoned all of them to the palace at the same time, no one would believe that it wasn't an important matter. The emperor was seriously ill and the great court conference was approaching. At this delicate moment, there was only one thing that could be called an important matter. The position of crown prince. For a moment, the atmosphere of the entire capital became tense. This was especially so for the princes who had already arrived in the capital. Their hearts were in their throats. All of their fates might change today. Countless gazes were focused on the palace gate. The 10 officials of the imperial court only came out of the palace at night. However, after leaving the palace, each of them directly returned to their residences in their carriages and closed the doors, refusing to meet any guests. Regardless of whether it was the princes or the high-ranking officials in the capital, they refused to meet any of them. This undoubtedly made the entire matter even more confusing. Prince Qi's residence. Prince Qi, who had been regarded as a popular candidate to seize the throne, was now enraged. He smashed a few cups and said angrily, "What did father say to them? He actually refused to meet any of them. What does he mean by this?" Someone behind him came forward and comforted him, "Your Highness, there's no need to worry. We didn't meet Prince Axayan either. After those lords returned, they refused to meet any guests." After hearing this, Prince Chi felt slightly more at ease. He was not afraid of not meeting him. What he was afraid of was not meeting Prince Axian or the other princes. The meaning behind this was very clear. He returned to his seat and said with a disappointed expression, "It's said that the throne will definitely be decided after the Great Court Conference. Right now, there's less than a month until the Great Court Conference. Even if father wants to wait, he should at least release some news." Prince Axian Manor, did they really say that? A young man looked at the servants and asked, "Did you guys report my name?" That person immediately replied, "Your Highness, of course we reported your name." However, the servants in those lords' residences all said that they won't be meeting any guests recently. Not only did we not see them, but Prince Chi and the other princes also didn't see them. Hearing this, Prince Axian's countenance eased up a little. He waved his hand and said, "If that uncle of mine was still a servant, we wouldn't be in such a passive position right now." That servant sighed and said, "The Qin clan was so illustrious back then. To think that it has fallen to such a state. It's really a pity." Prince Axian let out a cold snort and said, "They only have themselves to blame. Chen Qing is Ai's uncle, but he didn't help Ai back then and chose to side with the king of Shu. Now, the clan that had several decades of glory has fallen to such a state that they almost became prisoners. Who can they blame for this?" Prince Axian was clearly still brooding over what had happened back then. When that servant heard this, he no longer dared to say anything else. Prince Axian and Prince Chi were not the only ones feeling perturbed. All the princes in the capital, as well as the high officials and nobles, felt very uneasy. However, there had been no news of what His Majesty had said to those lords. They could only wait for the upcoming Great Court Conference. The capital, which had been in a state of turmoil due to the fight over the position of the throne, suddenly quietened down again. However, everyone knew that this was probably the last moment of peace before the storm. Li Yi was really quiet. He held on to Li Duan with his left hand and Yong Ning with his right. His heart was extremely quiet. Li Duan was already very familiar with this little aunt of his and was willing to get close to her. Other than his family, the person he was the most willing to get close to was Shawning. Perhaps it was because the proud Lolita had been with him for the longest period of time. The closeness he felt towards Shawning was far greater than that of others. Yong Ning did not need to return for the next few days. After all, she had not fully recovered from her illness and would need to undergo psychological treatment from time to time. During this period of time, she did not need to stay in the palace. After coaxing the two little fellows to sleep, Li Yi still did not feel sleepy at all. The courtyard was a little cold, but he did not mind it at all as he lay on the chair. The sky was pitch black with no stars. The night was exceptionally quiet. Many things had happened recently. It had only been a few days, but the eldest princess was no longer the eldest princess. Li Xian was also going to become the emperor. His original plans had been completely disrupted. For a few moments, he started to feel lost about the path he was going to take in the future. Chapter 949. It was already the 20th of the 12th lunar month. In another 10 days, it would officially enter the 5th year of Jinghe. Many high-ranking officials and dignitaries in the capital had already begun to busy themselves with the New Year's festival. The common people were naturally busy as well. While they were busy, they couldn't help but feel a little worried. The weather seemed to be colder than in previous years, but there was no snow in the capital this year. Not only the capital, but there was no snow in the 13 states of the Gyeonggi region. For experienced farmers, they naturally knew what this meant. If it didn't snow this winter, the harvest next year would not be optimistic. Ruoqing's body had recovered. During the new year, the business of the brothel became more and more busy, but Zuamo kept a close eye on her and didn't allow her to manage those things. She was gentle, so she naturally couldn't dissuade Zuamo. The two of them just went out to buy some New Year's goods. Sometimes it was 3 people, and Li Yi played the role of carrying the bags. It was a happy thing to carry the bags for his woman. These things didn't need servants or guards to do for him. According to his original plan, this year's reunion night should be spent with the family. However, Zui Mo's wedding dress had not been finished for a long time, and there was no good time to tell Ruoqing. The imperial court meeting was approaching. It was not difficult to imagine that the whole capital would directly explode at that time. Li Yi himself didn't know how many things he had to do. He couldn't choose to do things with them at such a hasty time. After walking half a street, he had already carried a lot of things in his hands. Zui Mo and Ruoqing walked in front, and he and Su walked behind. Ever since he started hanging out with second great uncle, Li Yi realized that elder Su had started to become neurotic. He was already so old, but he was slowly turning into a masochist. His tendency to be a masochist was very serious. Every time he was abused, he would quietly find a place to sit, and his mind would wander off. In recent days, his realm had improved again, and he didn't need to find a quiet place to wander. After Little Red entered the door, Fong no longer needed to go to the Jade Courtyard, so naturally, he didn't need to follow her. Su's head was like a block of wood. Li Yi was bored by himself, so he went over and looked at the things they bought. He asked curiously, "Didn't you buy these things 2 days ago? Why are you buying them again?" "This is for Mrs. Chen." Drunk Mo looked at him grumpily and said, "Mrs. Chen is usually so good to us. It's almost the new year, so we naturally have to buy some gifts to send over." Li Yi smiled and said, "In a family, the man takes care of the outside and the woman takes care of the inside. I know you will think of these things. Whose family with you?" Drunking glanced at her and took Ruoqing's hand, saying, "Let's go to that shop and have a look." Ruoqing looked at her and smiled, and was immediately pulled away by Zuemo. Li Yi realized that ever since she had let go of the knot in her heart and said those words, some things had changed. For example, she had started to be on the same side as Ruoqing, making him seem like an outsider. He wouldn't lower himself to her level now, but after she married into the family, he would deal with her properly. As for what she had just said, he naturally wouldn't ignore it. Although the Qin family had been confiscated, their property confiscated, and their servants chased away, it wasn't as if nothing had been left behind. Chen Chong and the Qin brothers now ran a cloth shop. It wasn't big, but it was more than enough to support a family. Of course, as the only designated supplier for the ready-made clothing shop in the capital, they didn't have to worry about business at all. Chen Chong didn't accept his gift, but he didn't reject it. What a hypocritical fellow. It wasn't easy to run a shop in the capital, especially for a family like the Qin family that had once been glorious and then quickly declined. Former friends might not still be friends, and former enemies would definitely still be enemies. These days, the people he had arranged in the open and in the shadows had already helped them clear up countless troubles. Seeing Zuemo and Ruoqing enter a shop, he quickly followed. Qin Cloth Shop. This was a newly opened cloth shop in the capital. Its name was ordinary, but the people who opened it were not ordinary at all. Once, the House of Duke, the Qin family had 2 sons. One was a minister, and the other was a third-rank attendant. They had countless friends and had unparalleled influence in the capital. They were the people that most of the common people and even the nobles looked up to. But that was then, and this was now. The present Qin family was just a commoner's family, no different from the majority of the people in the capital. The common people often talked about the prosperous poor, but they loved to see the nobles in distress even more. Every day, many people would come here, not to buy cloth, but to see what the once glorious Qin family had fallen to. After Qin Chong entered the shop, he waved his hand and said, "Li Jun, these rolls of cloth were ordered by a customer yesterday. They will be coming to collect them soon. Move them over there." "Yes." Chen Lijun, who had once been one of the capital's greatest profligates, was now wearing extremely ordinary clothes. Hearing this, he immediately ran over, strenuously picked up the rolls of cloth, and placed them on the other side of the shop. Chen Chong lifted a curtain and walked into a small room inside. Frowning, he said, "Miao Yu, didn't I tell you to rest at home? Why are you here again?" Among the women, third Miss Chen looked back and shook her head. "It's so boring staying at home. Why don't you come over and teach them how to embroider? If you feel bored, let Xiao or accompany you to the brothel to watch a show. I heard that there's a new show going on there recently. It's fine, second brother. I can only feel at ease if I have some work to do." Chen Chong looked at her, shook his head slightly, and finally said no more. Inside the shop, seeing that another customer had come in, Chen Lijun hurriedly got up, walked over, and asked, "Sir, are you looking around or?" The young man smiled and said, "To collect the goods." Chen Lijun nodded his head and said, "Please show me your bill." The young man took out a piece of paper from his bosom. Chen Lijun glanced at it, then walked to the other side and quickly came back with a roll of cloth. He said, "This is your cloth. Please check it. If there's no problem, just pay the balance." The young man opened the roll of cloth and turned it around to examine it. He asked, "Is this cloth sturdy? Don't pass it off as good. If it's not sturdy, I won't pay." Chen Lijun smiled and said, "Sir, don't worry. In the entire capital, you won't be able to find cloth as sturdy as ours, rip." The young man stretched out his hand and lightly tore the cloth in his hand. He threw the roll of cloth on the ground, looked at Chen Lijun, and asked, "This is the sturdiest cloth in the capital?" Chen Lijun stared at him in a daze. In terms of patterns, the cloth here could not compare to other places, but in terms of sturdiness, this was already the best in the capital. Who would have thought that the person before him would be able to casually tear this cloth apart with his bare hands? The young man took out a few more pieces of paper and handed them to another shop assistant. He asked, "These are the other rolls of cloth I ordered from you yesterday. Where are they?" The shop assistant pointed in a direction in a daze and said, They're all over there." The young man strode over, opened a roll of cloth, and lightly tore it. After a sound like silk tearing, he casually threw the roll of cloth away and stepped on it. Rip! 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 All of the rolls of cloth, in his hands, were like paper. He easily tore them apart and threw them on the ground. He stood in the middle of the rags and indifferently said, "This is the sturdiest cloth in the capital that you spoke of." Chapter 950. You're here to deliberately cause trouble. Even ordinary cloth could not be torn apart so easily. Chen Lijun was very familiar with his family's cloth. A person who could tear through this cloth like it was paper was definitely not an ordinary person. He was not a customer. The scene before him was his ultimate goal. The young man stepped on the cloth and lightly said, "You claim that your family's cloth is the sturdiest in the entire capital. Who would have thought that it would be torn with just a light tear? I'm afraid the cloth sold in this shop is only of inferior quality, right?" The curtain in the inner room was lifted open and Chen Chong walked out. His gaze swept across the interior of the shop and looked at the young man. Calmly, he asked, "Who sent you?" Before this shop had opened, he had already predicted many things. When the Qin family was at its peak, it had many families and vassals that it was on good terms with, but it also had many enemies. After the Qin family fell into decline, the small families that had been its vassals naturally looked for other big families. Some of the families that it was on good terms with were exiled, some were still in prison, and the rest avoided the Qin family like the plague. Of course, there were also many people who were happy to see the Qin family in its current state. As they walked by, they would throw a few stones and spit a few times, at this time, asking the two sides what their grievances were and why they had come to cause trouble was a very childish thing to do. Thus, he did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. "You're the shopkeeper of this shop?" The young man looked at him, shook his head, and said, "I don't understand what you mean. Your family uses these rags to deceive the customers, but you don't want to talk about it and say something I don't understand. What do you mean?" The cloth shop was located in a busy market. With the new year approaching, there was an endless stream of customers. This was the time when business was at its peak. In a short time, there were many more customers outside the shop. "What's wrong with these cloth?" A gentle voice came from behind. Third Miss Chin opened the curtain and saw the situation inside the shop. She quickly walked out, bent down, and picked up the cloth on the ground. "Put it down. Do you still want to destroy the evidence?" The young man reached out and grabbed the cloth. With a sudden tug, he snatched it from her hands. Because he had used too much strength, she lost her balance and fell to the side. "Miao Yu." Chen Chang's expression changed. He immediately rushed over and helped her up, asking with concern, "Miao Yu, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Chen Miao Yu waved her hand, and Chen Chang's sharp senses noticed a few traces of blood seeping out of her palm. Chen Miao Yu noticed the change in his expression and shook her head, saying, "It's just a scratch, it's not a big deal." "You're courting death." Chen Chong handed her to the maidservant behind him. Looking at the young man, his eyes were bloodshot. He clenched his fist and punched the young man's face. "You unscrupulous shop, how dare you make a move?" The young man raised his head, grabbed Chen Chong's fist, and shouted, "Everyone, come and take a look. Let's see what kind of business this shop has." Chen Chong only felt a huge force on his fist. His arm could not move forward, nor could he pull it back. His fist was in excruciating pain, and beads of sweat immediately appeared on his forehead. "Hey, everything was fine. What's going on?" A rough voice suddenly came from the door. A man wearing coarse clothes and a handkerchief around his neck walked in. He patted the young man's shoulder and said with a smile, "Brother, if you have something to say, we can talk it out. There's no need to use force." Chen Chong felt the hand that had gripped his fist loosen, and his arm regained its freedom. The young man's body trembled. Under the man's light pat, his entire arm had gone numb. Chen Chong did not recognize this man who had suddenly appeared, but Chen Lijun did. This person had appeared on the second day that the cloth shop had opened. He had set up a tea stall in front of the shop. Normally, there was not much business. In the morning, Chen Lijun had been curious as to how this tea stall, which only sold a few cups of tea, was able to support his family. Knowing that the man in coarse clothes was an expert, the young man's expression changed dramatically. He shouted, "Assault, unscrupulous shop is assaulting people. Come with me, let's destroy this unscrupulous shop. Hey, if you have something to say, talk it out, don't use force." The man grabbed the young man's neck and hurriedly said, "Brother, calm down, calm down. Hey, brother, why aren't you saying anything?" With his neck strangled, the young man's face was completely red, and his eyes were about to pop out. He wanted to pry the man's arm away, but he could not muster any strength. "Let him go." 3 people rushed in from outside the door and shouted, "It's broad daylight, what do you think you're doing?" The 3 people blocked the man from 3 directions. Under the man's arm, the young man's face had already turned from red to white, and then to green. What are you doing?" Li Yi, Ruoqing, and Zui Mo walked in from outside and looked at the scene in surprise. The man let go of the young man, and the young man fell to the ground, gasping for breath. When the man saw Li Yi, a smile appeared on his face. When he saw the slovenly elder behind Li Yi, his eyes began to shine. Li Yi walked over, looked at Chen Chong, and asked, "What's going on?" Chen Chong shook his head. "Someone must have sent someone to cause trouble again." Li Yi turned to look at the man and said, "Go ask him who sent him." Chen Chong looked at third Miss Chen and said with concern, "Miao Yu, I'll take you to the infirmary to bandage your wounds." Only now did Li Yi see the blood seeping out of third Miss Chen's hand. He turned and waved his hand, saying, "Forget it, there's no need to ask." He then turned to the slovenly elder and said, "Su, I'll have to trouble you to ask him yourself." The slovenly elder nodded expressionlessly and walked up to the young man. The young man was about to speak when the old man casually sealed his acupoint with a finger and said, "Don't speak. Close your eyes and feel it well." As soon as he finished speaking, the young man fell to the ground. Then, his expression became extremely ferocious, but he couldn't make any sound. The veins on his forehead bulged, and the veins on his neck wriggled like earthworms. The faces of the three people beside him turned pale, and their bodies trembled. "There's clean gauze and medicine in the stall next door. I'll go get it." Wan Ruoqing put down the things in her hands and walked out quickly after saying this. Third Miss Chen smiled and said, "It's just a superficial wound. There's no need to go through so much trouble. I'll use it. I'll use it." Li Yi and Chen Chong spoke at the same time. The two looked at each other and then turned their heads at the same time. Ruoqing returned very quickly. Together with Zuemo, she took third Miss Chen inside to treat the wound. On the ground, the acupoints on the young man's body had been unsealed, and the veins had all subsided. However, his body was still twitching unconsciously. The burly man squatted down and looked at him with some pity. He advised, "Brother, I suggest you tell us who sent you here. That was just the appetizer. If you still don't tell us." The young man's body was still twitching, as if he could no longer hear what he was saying. The burly man patted his face and asked, Brother, are you all right?" Only when his hand hurt from the patting did he shake his head and stand up. Looking at the three people, he asked, "If he doesn't tell us, will you guys tell us?" Plop. The three people knelt on the ground at the same time and said in horror, "We don't know, we really don't know. We just received money to do the job. We don't know anything else." Chen Chong shook his head and said, "Just like the previous times, they also don't know who's behind them. You don't understand." Li Yi shook his head and said, "The people behind them usually won't be satisfied with just hearing. They want to see the results with their own eyes. Maybe he's hiding somewhere and secretly watching." Chen Chong looked at him and asked, "How do you know?" "I guessed." Li Yi walked over, looked at the three people, and asked, "You don't know who he is, but you definitely know where he is, right?" One of them had a face full of horror. "We really," Li Yi looked behind him. "Su, I might have to trouble you again, we know." The man looked at Li Yi and said sincerely, "We really know." Chapter 951. Outside the clothing shop, a horse carriage was parked at a certain alley on the street. At a certain moment, a young voice rang out from within the carriage, "Why isn't there any movement inside?" "I don't know. Do you want me to go over and take a look?" The coachman turned back to look at the carriage and asked in a probing manner. "There's no need." A voice rang out from within the carriage, "Wait for another 15 minutes. If there's still no news, we'll leave." The coachman nodded. He had just turned around when he saw a few figures walking out from the shop toward the horse carriage. His countenance changed, and he was about to shake the reins to leave when he turned back and saw a man sitting on the other side of the horse carriage, smiling at him. "This brother, how are you?" Li Yi and Chen Chong stood in front of the horse carriage, looking at it, and said, "Come down." There was no movement in the horse carriage. After an unknown period of time, the curtains of the carriage were pulled open, and a young man walked out from within. The moment Chen Chong saw that young man, his countenance turned extremely grim. "Lord Chen, how have you been?" The well-dressed young man tidied up his clothes, cupped his hands together, and smiled at Chin Chong, looking like an old friend whom he had not seen for many years. Over 10 people who looked like guards appeared behind him at the same time. This is... Li Yi looked at Chin Chong and asked. This commoner pays his respects to Prince Axian. Chin Chong bowed slightly, indicating the identity of the person before him. Li Yi was stunned. He looked at Chin Chong and asked, "Have you tolerated it?" Chin Chong lowered his head, remaining silent. This meant that he had tolerated it. After all, the current Qin clan could not possibly go up against Prince Axian. Since Prince Axian had tolerated it, there was no reason for Chin Chong not to. Third young mistress Chin walked out of the shop hurriedly. She looked at Chin Chong and said anxiously, "Second brother, I'm fine." "Don't be rash." Looking at the white-haired lady's pale face and the bandage on her hand, which had traces of blood seeping out, Li Yi sighed, turned back, looked at that young man, and asked, "Who are you again?" The young man looked at him with a hint of doubt in his eyes. "You are." Li Yi cupped his hands. "I am Li Yi." The young man's expression froze, but he quickly smiled and said, "I just sent an invitation to Dr. Li a few days ago. The servants of the Li family said that Dr. Li is seriously ill and can't go out. I don't know what illness Dr. Li is suffering from. It's only been a few days, but it seems that he has recovered." Li Yi looked at him and suddenly slapped his face. Before he could react, Li Yi asked, "Now do you know what illness I have?" "You, hysteria, intermittent hysteria. The emperor personally issued an imperial edict. Hitting people in Jingdo is not illegal." Half of the young man's face had temporarily lost all feeling, and an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. At the next moment, the young man pointed at Li Jie and said fiercely, "How dare you? I'm Prince Axian, Li Jie." "How dare you?" Li Yi was puzzled. "Believe in what?" "Prince Axian Li Jie." "What Jie?" "Prince Axian Li Jie." "Why are you speaking so loudly?" "So what if he's called Li Jie?" "So what if he's called Li Jie?" "How dare you make fun of me?" "Paw!" Li Yi slapped the other side of his face again, looked at him, and said, "What do you mean by believing in Jie or not? Young man, can't you straighten out your tongue before you speak?" Earlier, it was only half of his face. Now, it was his entire face. The young man could no longer speak. Li Yi looked at Chin Chong and asked in a soft voice, "Have you calmed down?" A hint of elation appeared on Chin Chong's face as he shook his head slightly. It was just 2 slaps. How could his anger be appeased? If the Qin clan was still the Qin clan and Prince Axian was not Prince Axian, it would already be letting him off too easily. "If you still haven't vented your anger." Li Yi took out the dagger that Mississippi Lu had given him from his sleeves and handed it to Chin Chong, saying, "This is for you. Do it yourself." Reality once again proved that Chin Chong was a man who did not mean what he said. Li Yi kept the dagger and looked at Chin Chong with a hint of puzzlement on his face. He asked, "What happened earlier?" The over 10 guards behind Prince Axian all drew their weapons and dropped them onto the ground almost at the same time. The unkempt old man threw a peanut into his mouth, and that man ran over with a fawning expression, asking, "Senior, are you thirsty? Would you like a cup of tea?" Prince Axian regained his calmness. He glared at Li Yi and asked, "Li Yi, County Marquis Li, Dr. Li, are you really going to do this?" "This is..." Li Yi looked at Chin Chong and asked, puzzled. Chin Chong immediately introduced, "This is Prince Axian." Li Yi looked at him and said in astonishment, "Prince Axian? What did you mean by that? Let's go." Prince Axian did not throw him another look and turned to get into the carriage. The guards behind him heaved a sigh of relief, picked up their weapons, and left quickly. Things happened very quickly. Before the crowd on the streets could gather, they dispersed very quickly. Third young Miss Chin looked at him worriedly. You. How could you do this? That's Prince Axian. Li walked over, looked at him, and asked in concern, does your hand still hurt? In this world, other than his family and friends, there were two people whom he would definitely not allow anyone to hurt. One was because he could not give up on his bloodline, and the other was because of a debt that could not be made up for. Regardless of whether it was King Shu or Prince Axian, there was no need for them to consider these things. Third young Miss Chin looked at him with a helpless expression. However, her tone turned gentle as she said, come in first. At the entrance of the shop, Chin Chong took a step forward and asked, it's not Prince Axian? Li nodded. Then it's King Chi. Li shook his head. Chen Chong revealed a surprised expression, but he did not ask any more. It was only after a long while that he said, no matter if it's him or not, he's still a prince. You were a little rash today. He sighed and said, no matter what, thank you for today. There's no need to thank me. Li looked at him and said in disdain, you don't even dare to stand up for your kin when they're being bullied. You coward. A few dark lines appeared on Chin Chong's forehead. Did standing up for Miao Yu mean that he had taken his dagger and stabbed Prince Axian twice? Even if he, the greatest sycophant in the Jing kingdom, were to do something like this, he would not be able to resolve the matter peacefully, right? The people from the Li family were really as detestable as ever. On the streets, in a carriage that was moving slowly, that coachman said, feeling a little indignant, that sycophant dares to be so audacious just because he has His Majesty's favor. He's not showing any respect for His Highness and the royal family. As long as His Highness accuses His Majesty, shut up. An extremely stifled voice rang out from within the carriage. Prince Axian's expression was one of shame and fury, but there was even more fear. He was furious and ashamed because he had been humiliated by Li Yi in front of so many people. If this were to spread to other people's ears, how would he, a prince, still have any face left to speak of? What was terrifying was that person was his father's most favored subject, going in and out of the palace all the time. His father's trust in him was greater than that of any other subject. If there was an important matter, how could he possibly not know about it? Although it had not been announced to the public who would be the Eastern Palace, many of the subjects in the imperial court, including Prince Axian, definitely knew. If the crown prince was Li Jie, then why would Li Yi dare to do this to him? He clenched his fists tightly, and his knuckles turned white. He gritted his teeth and said, King Chi, King Chi. Is it King Chi? Chapter 952. The news of Prince Axian being slapped in the face in public spread like wildfire. During this period of time, everyone in the capital had their eyes on Prince Axian and Prince Qi. If something were to really happen to them, no one would be able to hide it. Moreover, this had happened in broad daylight and the process was very simple. There was no need for too much guesswork. Although not everyone knew about the relationship between the Qin clan and Prince Axian, many officials and nobles in the capital knew about it. Qin Qing was Prince Axian's uncle. Compared to King Shu, Prince Axian should be closer to the Qin clan. However, a long time ago, the Qin clan had firmly stood on King Shu's side. There was no such thing as closeness in the imperial court. Back then, the power that Prince Axian possessed was far too different from King Shu's. The Qin clan's choice would decide the clan's rise and fall for the next several decades. Therefore, they naturally had to choose a good tree to live in. Therefore, the Qin clan ended up in the current situation. Seeing that the Qin clan had fallen to such a state, Prince Axian, who had been given up on by the Qin clan back then, was now a popular candidate to fight for the position of crown prince. It was normal for him to kick the Qin clan when they were down. It was not strange for him to be slapped in the face when he was down. With His Majesty's previous decree, it wouldn't be a problem for County Marquis Li to beat up a few people in the capital. Although this person was Prince Axian, wasn't there still the precedent of King Shu? Some people felt that it was strange. Prince Axian and the Qin clan did not have a good relationship, but the Li family and the Qin clan seemed to have a deep feud. To think that they would stand up for the Qin clan and slap Prince Axian. It was really hard to distinguish the complicated relationship. There were also people who felt that Li Yi was arrogant and condescending, relying on His Majesty's favor and trust to look down on even the princes. Such a person would be a sycophant in any dynasty. When the new emperor took over, he would definitely not have a good ending. Of course, there were even more people who felt that Prince Axian would not be able to fight for the position of crown prince this time around. Although that legendary County Marquis Li often did shocking things, he had never been a rash person. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for him to reach his current position over the past few years. This meant that he was not afraid of Prince Axian's revenge. It was because Prince Axian was just Prince Axian. Prince Axian, who was going to start preparing to return to his conferred land after the imperial court meeting. This was a piece of news that shed a bright light on the confusing struggle for the throne. Qi Manor. The Prince of Qi was pacing back and forth in his residence. Hearing the sound of footsteps coming from outside, he hastily walked out and asked a servant, "Has it been confirmed? Is this matter true?" That servant said agitatedly, "Your Highness, this matter is absolutely true. I've already verified it a few times. That Lord Li has really made a move against Prince Axian." "Ha, as expected, as expected." Laughing maniacally, the Prince of Qi declared, "Prepare a generous gift for I and deliver it to official Li's residence." "Yes." That person immediately retreated. He was thinking about how generous and heavy the gift was. Before the hysteria broke out, Li Yi had already predicted the impact of this incident. The situation in the capital was very complicated, and the current situation was very chaotic. If something were to happen to Prince Axian, it would cause quite a big commotion. What followed after was all sorts of guesses. There were so many princes in the capital, and these two slaps had eliminated a wrong answer for them. Those small clans who had submitted to Prince Axian early on would be able to immediately look for another ruler. They would definitely feel especially grateful toward him. The facts proved that his guess was right. Very soon, someone came to deliver a gift. Fang, who had not been seen for 2 days, walked in and asked, "Young master, are you going to accept the gift from the Prince of Qi Manor?" Li Yi waved his hand. "No. One must have a bottom line." He understood the reason why the Prince of Qi had sent a gift. The two princes who had been in the limelight during the fight for the throne in the capital were the Prince of Qi and Prince Axian. Now that Prince Axian had been eliminated as the wrong answer, the Prince of Qi was confident and naturally wanted to send a gift to express his gratitude. However, the Prince of Qi was also a wrong answer. If Fang Xingjian were to accept his gift, wouldn't it give him the misconception that he was already halfway to the throne? "All right, I'll get them to bring it back." Fang took a few steps, gave it some thought, and then turned back to ask, "Are you really not going to accept it? Is the gift from the Prince of Qi very heavy?" This was a matter of principle and not a matter of whether the gift was heavy or not. Li Yi hesitated for a moment, looked at Fang, and asked, "How heavy is it?" In a certain aristocratic manner in the capital, a servant ran into the study anxiously and said anxiously, "Old master, bad news. Lord Li has accepted the Prince of Qi's heavy gift." "As expected." "As expected." "For real." "For real." "Prince Axian isn't a good person. Prepare the carriage. I'm going to pay a visit to His Highness the Prince of Qi immediately." In the study, a man hurriedly changed into casual clothes and was about to leave. The servant asked out of curiosity, "Old master, since Lord Li has accepted the Prince of Qi's gift, does this mean that His Highness the Prince of Qi is the crown prince that His Majesty and the officials have decided on?" What do you know? The man waved his hand. If not, why would Lord Li accept the Prince of Qi's gift? Could it be that he covets those things? Qin Manor. Qin Xiang looked at the letter in his hand, shook his head slightly, and mumbled, "This matter is already muddy enough. Does he still want to stir it up further?" Prince Axian Manor. He really accepted it. Prince Axian slumped weakly onto the chair, his countenance pale. That person had slapped him in the face and accepted the Prince of Qi's gift. Was there a need to say more about the meaning behind this? He had lost. He had completely lost. Li. Prince Axian's gaze looked toward the empty space outside the door. He gritted his teeth and revealed a venomous expression in his eyes. Prepare the carriage. We're going to the Prince of Qi Manor. Lord Butler, just send me off here. A man smiled and walked out from the Prince of Qi Manor, saying, "In the future, I'll definitely follow His Highness's lead." He walked down the stairs, and a luxurious carriage happened to stop at the manor's entrance. Prince Axian. When the man saw the young man who came down from the carriage, he broke into an awkward expression. After all, he had just said that he would follow Prince Axian's orders at the Prince of Axian Manor yesterday. Today, he was at the Prince of Qi Manor's entrance, and he was even seen by the person involved. Women who had two hearts were not likable, and men who were fickle and two-timing were not good people either. The middle-aged man lowered his head and immediately left in shame. Prince Axian did not look at him. His gaze turned toward the Prince of Qi Manor and said, "Bring me to meet Brother Qi Manor." The Prince of Qi Manor was seated in the main hall. It was only when Prince Axian walked in that he raised his head to take a look. After Prince Axian walked over, he knelt down on one knee and said loudly, "Greetings, brother." The Prince of Qi Manor was stunned for a moment, but he instantly understood what Prince Axian meant. He broke into a victorious smile, walked over, and gently helped Prince Axian up. He smiled and said, "There's no need to be so polite between us brothers." Since it was a fight for the throne, there would naturally be people who would succeed and people who would fail. Those who failed would usually not end up well. For Prince Axian to have done such a thing before the results were announced, the meaning of him surrendering was very clear. "I've heard about what happened today," the Prince of Qi Manor looked at him and said slowly. The Prince of Qi Manor looked at him and said slowly, "That Li Yi is really going overboard. Slapping brother's face is the same as slapping the royal family's face. It's the same as slapping my face." Prince Axian knew that the Prince of Qi Manor's words were filled with righteous indignation and might be feeling very happy inside. Therefore, he did not continue on this topic. He knelt down once again and said respectfully, "Since I've lost, I'll be at brother's disposal in the future. I only hope that brother will spare my life on account of our past relationship." The Prince of Qi Manor's countenance was a little grim. He helped Prince Axian up once again and said unhappily, "What are you saying? Since we're both princes, it's inevitable for us to fight for the throne. No matter who wins or loses, we're still brothers. Do you think that I, the prince, will do something so disgraceful and immoral?" Of course, part of the reason why the Prince of Qi Manor's countenance was not very good was because his thoughts had been seen through. Although the Prince of Qi Manor had won against Prince Axian for now, there was no guarantee that Prince Axian would not have such thoughts in the future. The simplest and most convenient method was of course to kill him and end everything once and for all. However, if Prince Axian were to do something like this right after he ascended to the throne, it would be a source of ridicule for others. Moreover, Prince Axian knew how to adapt to the circumstances, so the Prince of Qi Manor could not go overboard. "Thank you, brother." Although Prince Axian did not dare to do this, he still said respectfully, "I'll congratulate brother in advance." The Prince of Qi Manor smiled. The truth was already very clear, and there was no need for him to hide it anymore. Although this is a great joyous occasion for brother. Prince Axian looked at him and said, "There's one person that brother must be on guard against." The Prince of Qi Manor looked at him and asked, "You're talking about Li Yi?" Prince Axian nodded and said, "This person has already made a name for himself in the imperial court and is able to influence the situation in the imperial court. He's also arrogant and despotic. To think that he doesn't fear the royal family now. I'm just afraid that when the time comes, he'll be a threat to brother." The Prince of Qi Manor fell silent for a moment before suddenly patting Prince Axian's shoulder and saying with a smile, "Don't worry. The day brother ascends to the throne will be the day that crafty subject dies." Chapter 953. Brother, there's no need to send me off. Brother, take care. Regardless of what they were thinking, at the very least, when Prince Qi and Prince Axian walked out of the hall, their faces were filled with smiles, looking like brothers. After walking out of the Prince Qi Manor and getting into the carriage, Prince Axian's countenance turned grim. Putting aside the fact that he had become the true loser in the fight for the throne, as a prince, he had even been humiliated on the streets. The worst thing that had happened in his entire life had happened in these 2 days. "I want to see how long you can continue to be smug." He gritted his teeth and said coldly, "Before that, I'll settle a small debt first." He lifted the curtain and said in a soft voice, "Help I investigate something." After returning to the hall, a hint of a cold smile appeared on Prince Qi's face. So what if he had authority over the entire court? So what if he could cover the sky with one hand? No matter how much his father favored him, when he ascended to the throne, it would just be a single decree for him to be dealt with. There were too many such examples in history. The ruler was the ruler, and the subjects were the subjects. If the ruler wanted the subjects to die, the subjects had no choice but to die. How could a mere county marquis have the capability to rebel? Is this a rebellion? Lu Dio rubbed his head and said in a soft voice in the county yamen. As the year approached, there were more matters to handle in the yamen. There was a huge flow of people in the capital, and it was hard to maintain law and order. There would be over 10 small cases of theft and robbery every day. Although there were no major cases, just these trivial matters were enough to give him a headache. What made him even more vexed was that when the constables in the yamen were investigating some old cases, they discovered some new clues. This caused him to feel a chill in his heart. This included the case of the son of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. Although it had been a long time, that case was too important. The number of deaths was high, and the way they died was so tragic that it attracted the attention of the entire capital. Even if it was hard to close the case, it was impossible to just let it go so easily. Thankfully, there were finally some clues to this case. Holy religion. As the mystery of that thing called holy religion was gradually revealed, Lu Dio felt as if he had sensed a huge hibernating beast hiding somewhere in the capital, secretly observing everything. This feeling made one's hair stand on end. How many people did the holy religion have in the capital? Who was the person called the Empress? He had no way of knowing, but it was precisely because of this mystery that people were afraid of. The new year was approaching, and the Imperial Court Conference was approaching. They could not afford to have any trouble during this period of time. In the coming year, they would have to report this matter to the Imperial Court and treat it seriously. Li Yi had a headache. The old madam had already told him several times that only when the family ate together on New Year's Eve could it be called a reunion dinner. If there was one less person, it would not be a reunion. The one with the least was naturally drunken ink. Even Rui had mentioned to him several times that it wasn't appropriate for the Li family to live outside all the time, as outsiders would gossip about her, but the problem was that drunken Mo was still thinking of ways to win over her best friend and add another mistress to the Li family. The time was not very ripe yet. This was really a headache-inducing matter. Li Yi was trying to persuade drunken Mo otherwise. He would have to persuade the old madam and Rui when he went back. Rui was the easiest to talk to, but the old madam was not easy to deal with. She could use that kind of sincere tone to talk in his ear for a whole day. In the whole family, besides Mississippi Lou, she was the person that Li Yi was most afraid of. Persuading drunk Mo alone was easier than persuading both of them. "I'm fine with anything." Drunk Mo looked up at him and said, "But if I move over now, Sister Ruoqing will definitely not go with me. It's not the right time, and I'm afraid it will have the opposite effect." Li Yi thought about it and felt that one couldn't always think of simple and easy things. Sometimes one had to challenge difficult things. Drunk Mo suddenly looked at him and asked, "There's a question I want to ask you." "What is it?" Li Yi smiled. His expression was unchanged, but his heart immediately became alert. She looked at Li Yi and asked curiously, "Me and Sister Ruoqing, who did you like first?" Li Yi looked up at the night sky, as if thinking. After a moment, he shook his head and said, "Tonight's moon." Drunk Mo looked at him and said, "There's no moon tonight, not even stars." No, there were stars. A few starlights appeared in Li Yi's eyes, streaking across the night sky and flying in this direction. The starlight fell on the roof and ignited a raging fire. It was not starlight, but fire. Drunk Mo was startled, and her expression changed. She said, "Sister Ruoqing is still inside. Protect her." Li Yi said in a low voice, and a maid-like woman at the door flashed and appeared beside Drunk Mo. A few more spots of light flew in different directions, and at the same time, a few figures appeared in the night sky, rushing in the direction of the fire. Inside the room, Wan Ruoqing, who was reading at the table, had not realized what had happened when she was carried out of the room by Li Yi. "You." Her face was red, and it was not until she was carried into the courtyard by Li Yi and saw the fire on the roof that her face began to turn pale. "Is there anything important in the room?" Li Yi asked quickly, ready to rush in again. The fire on the roof had spread, and it would not spread to the room for a while. It was too late to put out the fire, but there was still time to move some things out of the room. "No." Wan Ruoqing grabbed his hand and shook her head. "There's nothing important, don't take risks." Drunk Mo looked at her and seemed to think of something. She immediately said, "You're painting." Wan Ruoqing held Li Yi's hand tightly and shook her head. "It's not important, in fact, time came in a hurry," but she was holding his hand, and Li Yi could not rush in with her. These two rooms were not the only ones on fire in the Xing residence. Several guest rooms and the rooms where the servants lived were also on fire. There should be kerosene on the arrows, otherwise the fire could not have spread so quickly. People kept rushing in from outside and fighting the fire with the servants in the residence. Li Yi held the two women's hands and sat in the courtyard, watching the fire gradually engulf the entire room. After a while, a few people came in from outside, shook their heads, and said, "3 men of sacrifice. We just caught up with them and they died of poison." Li Yi used to have many enemies, but now, they were all in prison or on the way to exile. It was impossible for them to do something like setting a fire in the middle of the night. There were men of sacrifice and fire arrows. It was not a small matter. It was just that this person was a little too impatient. Fong dashed over in exasperation and scolded furiously, "That damned person is so immoral. 5 rooms have been burned. No one will be able to stay here tonight." Li Yi looked at the fire and said in a soft voice, "Prince Exian." "What?" "Prince Exian." Fong was stunned for a moment, then he turned and walked out. "I'll bring people to burn down Prince Exian residence right now." Li Yi pulled him back in time. The people were already dead, and there was no evidence. How could they accuse Prince Exian? Even if it was found out that Prince Exian had instructed others to do it, which of the charges of setting fire to a commoner's residence and setting fire to the prince's residence was greater? Recently, the weather had been dry, and the residences of the nobles were all closely connected. It would be bad if the innocent were to be implicated. It would not be as simple as waiting for him to leave the capital and breaking his legs. However, the Xing residence held a special meaning to drunken Mo. Li looked at her worriedly. Before he could say anything, she shook her head and said, "It's fine." "So what if the house is burned?" "It's fine as long as he's fine." Xiao Chui walked over pitifully and asked, "Young miss, where are we going to sleep tonight?" Li looked at the room that was still burning. The Xing residence was no longer suitable for people to stay in. It was already so late, and the inns and the like were all closed. Where they were going to stay at night was indeed his expression suddenly froze, and his gaze once again looked toward the few rooms that were lit up by the fire. This fire didn't seem to be that bad after all. Drunken Mo gave it some thought and said, "Let's go back to Willow Alley first. We'll be able to stay there after we get some bedding and tidy up." Willow Alley. Li shook his head and said, "Fang's relatives came to the capital a few days ago. It's not convenient for them to stay in an inn, so we let them stay there." "Ha!" Fang looked puzzled. Drunken Mo looked over suspiciously. "Really?" Fang looked at her, then at Li Yi, and nodded. "Yes, poor relatives from the countryside. They're not used to staying in inns. Sorry for the trouble they've caused, Miss Xing." With that, he turned and walked outside. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Where are you going?" Fang did not look back. He waved his hand and said, "I'm going to Willow Alley to remind those poor relatives that the weather is dry, and to be careful of open fires." Li Yi turned his head and looked at drunken Mo and Ruoqing. "Since we have nowhere to go now, why don't we?" Chapter 954. The atmosphere in the Li family was different from the manners of influential officials outside. The adults had good tempers, and even if the maids and servants accidentally did something wrong, they wouldn't punish them too much. Gradually, the servants also became more relaxed. They would still do what they needed to do, but they would be at ease and wouldn't need to be afraid. There would be great rewards during festivals, and they would even be allowed 2 days off every month. Such a situation was impossible to exist anywhere else in the capital. However, today, everyone was on full alert, not daring to slack off in the slightest. This was the second madam's first day back. If anything were to happen, the adults wouldn't beat or scold them, but they would definitely deduct all their rewards for this month. The maids were busy, occasionally glancing at a certain hole. They had thought that the madam and the second young mistress were already top-notch beauties in the world, but they hadn't expected that the second madam wouldn't pale in comparison. Even Miss Wan, who had come together with the second madam, who might be the third madam, wasn't an ordinary beauty. "Sister, please have some tea." In the hall, drunken Mo held a cup of tea and handed it over to Rui with a smile. Rui put the tea at the side, got up, and took her hand, smiling. "Sister, don't stand on ceremony. Come and sit." Although there was still a ceremony missing, it was just that. The Li family was easy to enter but hard to leave. Once she entered the Li family, she could forget about leaving. What had happened yesterday was actually very simple. Prince Axian had sent people to burn down the Xing residence, and Willow Alley had been occupied by Fang's relatives. It wasn't a good idea to bring 2 unmarried ladies to an inn in the middle of the night, and it would inevitably attract criticism. Bringing them back home to settle down was the best solution. The old mistress, who had heard the news, had rushed over in a hurry. She had been busy until the middle of the night and then rested here directly. She had also decided on the date of the wedding at the end of the next month. She had gotten someone to calculate the date in advance, and they had already missed a few auspicious dates. The next suitable date would be next month. Drunken Mo hadn't actually thought of this, but since the old mistress had spoken, she couldn't refute. Thus, she had agreed in a daze, which led to the scene in the morning. What surprised Li Yi was that Ruoqing hadn't rejected moving in with drunken Mo last night. If she hadn't agreed first, drunken Imo probably wouldn't have agreed either. Prince Aksayan had set the fire, he couldn't even bear to settle the score with him. Fong stood in the courtyard, looking at the three women who were whispering in the room. Then, he looked at Li Yi and asked in a low voice. "Young master, tell me, did you get someone to set the fire yesterday?" Li Yi frowned at him and asked, "Do I look like that kind of person? You saw those death warriors with your own eyes. Besides, would I let them take such a huge risk?" Old Fong gave it some thought and nodded. He then asked, "Then son-in-law, tell me honestly. Is Prince Aksayan one of us?" Fong's question was a good one. Even Li Yi himself had once had such a question in his mind. "I suddenly can't bear to." Li Yi thought about it and said, "Why don't we just break his 2 legs? You said it was 2 legs last night." 2 legs. The fire in the Xing residence wasn't a big deal, but it wasn't a small one either. It didn't cause much of a commotion last night, and it didn't cause much trouble during the day either. Of course, some people couldn't hide it even if they wanted to. Xing Shichen walked in anxiously. When he saw Li Yi, he went straight to the point and asked, "How's drunken Imo? Are you injured?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Only the house was burned. No one was injured." That was the Xing residence after all. Xing Shichen's face revealed a hint of sadness. He shook his head and said, "It's fine if the house is burned. It's good that everyone is fine. What about the arsonist? Have you caught him?" He only found out about this in the morning. He came here in a hurry and didn't go to the county office to ask about the situation. Li Yi shook his head. "They're all kamikaze warriors." "Kamikaze warriors?" Xing Shichen frowned. "Prince Aksayan. Even for the influential officials in the capital, kamikaze warriors weren't easy to nurture. It required a huge amount of resources. Perhaps only those princes would be able to use kamikaze warriors to set a fire. If there were only clues about those kamikaze warriors, it would be difficult to investigate this case. Even if Prince Aksayan couldn't become the crown prince, he was still a prince. Even if he was found, there wouldn't be any severe punishment. Knowing that Li Yi had his own thoughts on this matter, Xing Shichen didn't say much. After meeting drunken Imo, he left in a hurry. Not long after, Li Xian and the eldest princess came to visit at the same time. Li Yi said, surprised, "The imperial court assembly is only a few days away. You guys shouldn't be so free, right? I already know about the matter." Mingsu looked at him and said, "Even if we manage to find Prince Aksayan in the end, there probably won't be any results. The imperial court assembly is about to arrive, and many officials have gathered in the capital. You mustn't act recklessly. We'll settle the matter regarding Prince Aksayan after the imperial court assembly." "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing," Li Yi said, shaking his head. "At most, I'll just burn down his Prince Aksayan manor." Seeing that both Mingsu and Li Xian were looking at him, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I'm just joking. It's easy to implicate the innocent by setting a fire. Even if I have to break his 2 legs, I won't do something like setting a fire. Let's not talk about this anymore." Li Yi shook his head and said, "What about you guys? That matter? How's the preparation?" Li Xian sat down next to him, gulped down a mouthful of tea, and said, "Let's talk about the matter of you setting fire to Prince Aksayan Manor. Do you have enough manpower? Do you need my help? I can get them to scatter kerosene from the sky." In the capital's largest brothel, little Zhu walked over with a teapot, pointed to a young man, and said, "Hey, you're called Su Jing, right? Let them rest for a while and have a cup of water. They'll move it later. There's no hurry." The young man called Su Jing wiped off the sweat on his forehead, smiled, and asked, "Miss Little Zhu, where are you guys moving to? Is it the Xing Manor? I might as well get them to send it over directly." It would have been better if little Zhu had not mentioned the Xing manor. At the mention of the Xing manor, a furious expression appeared on little Zhu's face. She waved her hand and said, "It's not the Xing manor. I won't be going there in the future." Su Jing asked curiously, "What happened?" "You don't know. Last night, when we were about to sleep, some bad guys secretly released fire arrows. The entire Xing Manor's house was burned down. Young Miss and I were both frightened." She patted her chest, looking like she still had lingering fears. "I really can't imagine. If we had all fallen asleep last night, would those bad guys have wanted to burn us to death?" Naturally, she did not know how strong the guards in and out of the Xing Manor were. Even in the middle of the night, there would still be people on duty. Something like that would not have happened. The Xing Manor was set on fire. Su Zheng was stunned. He lowered his head and asked, "Miss Little Zhu, do you know who set the fire?" "I don't know." Little Zhu shook her head. Then, as if she had thought of something, she said, "I think it was some Prince Axayan who sent death warriors. Those people are too scary. They're not even afraid of death." "I heard that too." "Sigh, since you guys have rested enough, quickly move. Just move it to the horse carriage outside. Don't leave anything behind, all right?" The young man agreed readily. A smile returned to his face, and he waved his hand at the people behind him. "Move quickly. Don't delay the young lady's matters." Prince Axayan Manor, what? Only the house was burned. Prince Axayan heard this news from a servant. He waved his hand and scolded, "A bunch of useless people. They can't even handle such a small matter. What's the point of living, Your Highness? The guards in the Xing Manor are too powerful. Not a single one of our death warriors has returned." "I'm afraid," Prince Axayan waved his hand. "Forget it. Let him be smug for a few more days." In Prince Axayan Manor, a person who looked like a steward pointed to a few servants who were moving things and asked, "What are you guys moving?" One of the servants smiled and said, "Steward Zhao, this is the strong alcohol that we bought outside today." All right, I got it." Steward Zhao waved his hand and instructed, "Go and get busy. Remember to be careful." Chapter 955. From his expression, tone, and demeanor, it could be seen that Li Xian was very vexed. In order to fight for the throne, other princes disregarded their brotherhood. They fought openly and secretly, and used all kinds of deadly methods. In order not to be the emperor, he couldn't eat or sleep well. He was so haggard that he was constantly thinking about giving up the throne. If the king of Shu, king of Axayan, king of Qi, or any other king knew his thoughts, they would probably strangle him to death. Li Xian, who was in a dispirited state, suddenly raised his head and asked, "Do you have wine?" Since the last incident, Li Yi had stopped drinking. However, the person in front of him was his best friend, and he was willing to risk his life to accompany him. It was nothing to make an exception for once. As the crown prince, the future emperor, of course, he had to use the biggest bowl and drink the strongest wine. Li Yi stood up, waved his hand to the back, and said to a servant, "Bring out the best wine in the manor." Soon, a servant came with a jar of wine. Li Yi slapped the lid and poured a bowl for Li Xian and Emingzu respectively. He picked up his teacup and said, "Today there is wine, today we are drunk. Tomorrow's worries will come tomorrow. Let's drink." Li Xian's alcohol tolerance was not much better than his, but after drinking a large bowl of wine, his whole face was a little red, and his eyes were blurred. This bit of wine was naturally nothing to Emingzu. She drank it more easily than he drank tea. Mississippi Lu walked out of the room, and Rui, Zumo, and Ruoqing also followed. Li Xian looked up and saw Zumo and Ruoqing. He said in surprise, "When did you come in?" "Just yesterday." Li Yi looked at him and said, "The wedding is at the end of next month. You can't come at that time, but you can't miss the congratulatory gifts." At that time, Li Xian would already be the heir to the Eastern Palace. His status would rise, and so would the gift. "It's your wedding day, how could I not come?" Li Xian glared at him, then turned his head and asked, "How many?" The expression on Li Yi's face froze. He suddenly felt some regret. He should have made do with the grape wine just now. She poured him another bowl of wine and gritted her teeth. Do you really need to go through so much trouble?" Li Xian stood up with a red face. He shook his head and said, "Wouldn't it be better to settle everything at once?" He pointed to the yard and said, "Miss Zuamo, Miss Ruoqing." Then, he turned around and pointed. "Your second miss, there's also Mingzu. Tell me, can't you be more straightforward and act like a man?" Li Yi grabbed that bowl, pinched Li Xian's mouth, and poured the entire bowl of wine into his mouth. He then slung Li Xian over his shoulder and said, "He's drunk. I'll bring him to rest. In terms of experience and status, which part of me is inferior to Li Chuang? This throne. Why should it be given to him?" In Prince Axian manner, Prince Axian picked up a wine jar. After shaking it a little, he tossed it aside and said loudly, "Go get more wine." In the hall, all the dancers knelt on the ground, trembling with fear. They lowered their heads, not even daring to breathe loudly. Prince Axian was clearly drunk. If they were to infuriate him now, they might even be in danger of losing their lives. Immediately, a servant ran out hurriedly into the wine cellar, picked up a wine jar, and ran out. When he reached the door, he was stopped by someone. He said anxiously, "Quickly make way. This is what His Highness wants. We can't delay it." That servant said in a deep voice, "These are all top-notch strong wines. His Highness has already drunk so much. If he drinks any more, something will happen. If something were to happen to His Highness, none of us will be able to escape." That person's countenance turned pale, and he asked in a trembling voice, Then what should we do?" That servant took the wine jar from him and pointed to another corner. "Take it there. The wine there isn't very strong, so it won't be easy for something to happen." "Many thanks." That person responded, immediately picked up a jar, and ran out. The servant in green placed the wine jar back in its original spot, looked outside, and mumbled, "It's going to be dark soon." Li Yi had thought that Zuamo and Ruoqing moving into the house was a joyous occasion. However, by the looks of it now, it did not seem to be entirely the case. He did not know what Rui and Zuamo had talked about for the entire day, but they still wanted to sleep together at night. It seemed that they had a lot to talk about. Since Zuamo and Ruoqing had moved in, Xiao Zhu and Xiao Chui naturally had to move in as well. They were different from ordinary servant girls. Like Xiao Huan, they lived in the inner courtyard with Rui and Rui. With this, there were not enough rooms in the inner courtyard. Li Yi lay on the uncomfortable bed in the study, thinking about whether he should go over and deal with Rui and Zuamo since they were sleeping together. Anyway, it was about time. After careful consideration, he still felt that he should not be too complacent. It was not easy to achieve such great progress, and he might not necessarily be able to meet a good person like Prince Axian next time. Although he was no longer complacent, he could not help but feel happy and excited. He lay on the bed, tossing and turning. He did not know what time it was, but he still did not feel sleepy at all. Li Yi stood up, preparing to go to the courtyard to sit, enjoy the wind, and look at the moon. It was better than lying here. The courtyard was very quiet. He walked to the side of the rocking chair and lay down comfortably, placing his hands behind his head. Li Xian was a guy who did not have any tolerance for alcohol. When he was drunk, he would dare to say anything and would never keep his word. Previously, when he was drunk, he had said that he would give the crown prince's consort to him. Until now, he had yet to fulfill his promise. It was the same situation today. If it was not because he had acted fast enough, did he think that he would be able to withstand a few sword attacks from Rui and Emingsu? However, although the situation was not right for him to say those words, his logic was the same. However, there was nothing he could do even if it was troublesome. It was not as if he was going to choose a consort in the future and bring her into the palace after he took a fancy to her. It was something that would happen naturally as their relationship grew. Li Yi gave it some thought and mumbled, Zue Mo will be at the beginning of next year. Ruoqing will be a little later. What about Emingsu? Li Yi frowned and said, Emingsu won't be able to do it for now. What about Rui? Li Yi suddenly raised his head and saw Mississippi Lu lying on a thick branch of the tree behind him. Her hands were behind her head like him, and her two long legs were crossed. The bright moonlight shone down. Looking up from below, it was as if her whole body was emitting a faint radiance, full of a holy aura. Rui, what are you doing up there? I couldn't sleep, so I came out to look at the moon. Mississippi Lu floated down from the tree and asked curiously, what did you say about Li Emingsu just now? Li Yi waved his hand and said, she can handle political affairs, but her culinary skills are far from good. She can't even make egg-fried rice well. She can't even compare to Ruoqing, and she can't even compare to Drunk Ink. She's not much better than you, Rui. Countless lights flashed in his mind. In an instant, he strung the four names together and heaved a sigh of relief. Mississippi Lu looked at him and didn't say a word. Li Yi raised his head and noticed that her face was a little red, appearing a little charming in the night. It wasn't that she was blushing, but that her face had turned red because of the light. She was looking behind him. Li Yi turned back and saw a beam of red light in the distant horizon. No, it was a stretch of red light. Prince Xian's manor was in a state of panic. There's a fire. Quick, put out the fire. Prince Xian's Highness is still in his room. Someone, come quickly. This fire can't be extinguished even with water. This is kerosene. The servants of the prince's manor, who had already fallen asleep, were startled awake by the commotion. When they hurriedly put on their clothes and walked out of the door, what they saw was a stretch of fire that soared into the sky, as well as a crowd that was hurriedly scattering in all directions. In a place where no one noticed, a few figures had their hands crossed over their chests. For Her Highness. For Her Highness. For Her Highness. After exchanging a few words in a low voice, they turned around, passed through the panicking crowd, and went against the flow. Their figures soon disappeared. Chapter 956. Winter in Japan was a time when fires were more likely to break out. The weather was cold, and poor people relied on shivering to resist the cold, while wealthy people used charcoal to keep themselves warm. If they were not careful, it would lead to a great disaster. After the Xing Manor, Prince Xian's manor also caught fire last night. In terms of scale, degree of destruction, and impact, the former was a far cry from the latter. Not only was Prince Xian's manor burned down, but even the manor's two neighbors were also affected. A few houses and the mansions of two officials in the imperial court were burned down. Thankfully, it was discovered in time, and the damage caused was not great. Prince Xian's manor was in a terrible state. The entire manor was in ruins almost overnight. As for Prince Xian himself, he was also in a sorry state from the fire last night. Although his life was not in danger, his hair was burned. When he was escaping from the house, he tripped over the doorsill and broke one of his legs. He was still lying in the Imperial Physician's Bureau. It was said that the fire in Prince Xian's manor was so great that half the sky in the capital was dyed red. It was also said that when Prince Aksayan escaped from the house yesterday, he was not even wearing any clothes. It was also said that there was another man who also escaped from the house with Prince Aksayan, who was also not wearing any clothes. Fong walked over with an aggrieved expression and grumbled, "Young master, why didn't you tell me about such a major matter?" Li Yi was holding a copy of Capital Entertainment. The headline on the front page was about Prince Aksayan's manor being burned down and Prince Aksayan seemingly coming out of the closet. He raised his eyes to look at Fong and asked, "What's the matter?" "Burning down Prince Aksayan's manor." Fong sat down opposite him and said, "Young master, you lied to me, saying that you would only take action after he left the capital. I didn't expect that you couldn't even wait a day. Were you really the one who burned down Prince Aksayan's manor?" Tsing Shichen hurried in from outside and looked at Li Yi. You're too rash. No matter what, Prince Aksayan is still a prince. It's one thing if you wait for him to leave the capital and take action secretly. But you'll make things impossible to resolve. It wasn't me. Li Yi shook his head. He wondered which hero had done a great deed. Although it felt great, it was really baffling that he was the scapegoat. He gave it some thought and said, perhaps the people from Prince Aksayan's manor were careless in keeping themselves warm. Could it be that the people from Prince Aksayan manor use kerosene for warmth? Tsing Shichen's countenance turned a little grim. The surroundings of Prince Aksayan's room have been doused with a large amount of kerosene. This is clearly an act of arson. If it wasn't because we discovered it in time, Prince Aksayan would probably have died in the sea of fire last night. If you think about it, you'll know that I'm not the one who did this. Li Yi shook his head and said, Prince Aksayan set fire to the Zheng manor. The imperial court can't deal with him, so I'll deal with him myself. However, setting fire to the Prince Aksayan manor after only one day. This is too obvious. It's like what you've said. I was planning on breaking both of his legs after he left the capital. Now that one of his legs has been broken, I can only break the other two. Are you really going to do it? Tsing Shichen looked at him in shock, then shook his head and said solemnly, but the people will not think so. They will only make the simplest guesses. Gossip is a fearful thing. Li Yi put down the limited edition, Capital Entertainment, in his hand, shook his head, and said, the people in the capital aren't fools. They'll seek justice for me. Let's hope so. Tsing Shichen sighed. The one who is investigating this case is Lu Dao. He's a meticulous person and should be able to discover some clues. Li Xian and the princess had come together again. Li Yi had already explained earlier and did not wish to waste his breath. He looked at them and said helplessly, if I were to say that I have nothing to do with this matter, would you guys believe me? It's him. It must be him. Although Prince Aksayan's face was no longer as black as before, a large part of his hair had been burnt, and there were still waves of pain in one of his legs. His countenance was savage as he said loudly, how audacious. He's really audacious. This is the capital, and he set fire to the prince's manor. He's trying to rebel. An official in front of the bed said in a soft voice, Your Highness Prince Aksayan, the county office has already sent people to investigate the cause of the fire last night. Please calm down and recuperate in peace. What's there to investigate? What's there to investigate? Prince Aksayan's countenance was infuriated, and he wanted to get up from the bed. However, he accidentally affected his injuries and lay back down. He said loudly, What's there to investigate? He's taking revenge. He's taking revenge on I for burning down the Zheng manor. Therefore, he came to burn down I's manor. So, the arson at the Zheng manor last night was instigated by His Highness Prince Aksayan. Lu Dao stood below, holding a small book in his hand. He wrote a few lines of words and said, I'll report what His Highness Prince Aksayan has said without missing a single word. What Zheng manor? If I want to burn it, I'll burn it down. Prince Aksayan waved his hand and said in disdain, but he's burning down the prince's manor. This is treason and he deserves to have his entire clan executed. After the prince's manor was burned down last night, 4 servants disappeared from Prince Axian's manor. Lu Dio looked at him and said, according to the butler of the prince's manor, these 4 people bought a batch of strong alcohol from outside yesterday. Judging from the situation at the scene, they didn't buy strong alcohol but kerosene. It's the kerosene that burned down the entire Prince Axian manor last night. Prince Axian's countenance changed and he immediately said, what servants of the prince's manor? He must have gotten someone to impersonate them. He wants to get I killed. According to the butler and the other servants of the prince's manor, the 4 of them were brought here by your highness from your feudal land. Before this, they had already been with your highness for 2 years and have never been to the capital. Therefore, it's impossible for them to be impersonators. Prince Axian was stunned for a moment and then said furiously, nonsense. How could the servants of my prince's manor possibly commit arson? We'll have to ask His Highness Prince Axian about this. Lu Dio looked at him and asked, Your Highness Prince Axian, why don't you think about it carefully? Before you came to the capital, did you offend anyone? For example, some concubine. What concubine? Prince Axian slapped the side of the bed fiercely and said furiously, the only person I offended is him. It must be him. Lu Dio looked at him and said in a soft voice, Your Highness, please rest well. I'll take my leave. When he walked to the door, he bowed toward a figure who had just entered. Greetings, Your Highness Prince Qi. Brother Qi King. When Prince Axian saw Prince Qi walk in, his eyes lit up and he said, Brother Qi King, you've seen how arrogant and despotic he is. If this person isn't eliminated, the imperial court won't be able to have peace. Prince Qi looked around, and the people in the room who had no business in it immediately left. He walked up to Prince Axian and said in a soft voice, You just sent people to burn down his house the day before yesterday, and he sent people to burn down your prince's manor yesterday. Do you take him to be a fool, or do you take everyone in the world to be fools? Brother Qi King. Prince Axian looked at him in disbelief. You. Even you, do you know what the people outside are saying? Prince Qi bent down and said, I heard that the ones who set fire to the prince's manor last night were a few servants from your manor. This trick of yours is too stupid. Prince Axian was speechless. After walking out of the Imperial Physician Bureau, Lu Dio loosened his fists. His palms were covered in sweat. Prince Axian was not scary, and neither was Prince Qi. What was scary was that holy religion, that lady. Before Prince Axian had even arrived in the capital, there were already spies from the holy religion in his manor. Who would dare to say that there were no such people in the other princes, officials and nobles in the imperial court, or even in his own manor? The power of this holy religion had once again surpassed his expectations. For the lady, Lu Dio's countenance was complicated as he mumbled and left quickly. Chapter 957. Holy Religion, Her Highness. Li Yi retracted his gaze from County Magistrate Lu, appearing to be deep in thought. Lu Dio nodded and said, That's right. The servants in Prince Axian's manor have indeed heard those 4 people saying the words for Her Highness. All the evidence shows that the arson case in Prince Axian's manor last night was done by them. Li Yi's gaze flickered. Could it be that the Taoist nun had come to the capital? Thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was not quite possible. The foundation of the holy religion was in the Qi kingdom. Right now, the Qi kingdom was in a state of chaos, with the first prince and the third prince vying for the throne. The Taoist nun shouldn't let go of such an opportunity, let alone come all the way to the Jing kingdom. Moreover, it was true that Fang Xingjian had not received any news regarding this. However, when had Prince Axian offended the Taoist nun? Fang Xingjian had no way of knowing this either. Li Yi knew that there were people from the holy religion in the capital. However, within this organization, it had always been a one-way communication. The members at the bottom of the hierarchy would not be able to come into contact with the core secrets, and it would also be very difficult for outsiders to infiltrate the organization. Even the intelligence department, which had strict control over the organization, knew very little about them. Setting fire to Prince Axian's manor. It could not be ruled out that they wanted to create some big news while the imperial court meeting was nearing. Prince Axian was just lucky to have been chosen by them. No matter what, at a time like this, the authorities would still have to take strict precautions. Li Yi looked at Fang Xingjian, gave it some thought, and said, although these people are very well hidden, there will always be some clues. You should pay attention to the cases of people going missing in the suburbs of the capital or the abnormal movements of some villages. You should be able to discover something. From Li Yi, Lu Dao obtained a lot of information about the holy religion. When he walked out of the Li mansion, he felt as if he had forgotten something, but he couldn't tell what exactly he had overlooked. Although the death of the son of the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Works and the burning of Prince Axian's manor were very far apart, they should have been done by the same group of people. What was their motive? What was the connection between these two cases? Lu Dao rubbed his slightly swollen head. Prince Axian's manor had only been burned down, and no one had died. He had to put this matter aside for now. Quite a lot had happened in the capital this year, and he had to immediately start preparing to report his work at the imperial court meeting. Li Yi didn't think much about the holy religion. Their influence in the Jing kingdom was limited, and the capital was under heavy pressure. After setting fire to Prince Axian's manor, they had already given themselves away a little. If they were to make another move, they would definitely not be able to hide from the imperial court's pursuit. What he should be concerned about was the matter at hand. Although drunken Mo hadn't married into the family yet, she was already the second, third mistress of the house. For the past 2 days, Rui had been guiding her to familiarize herself with the matters of the house. Today, she was brought over by the old mistress to meet someone. With Rui accompanying her, Mississippi Lu had gone to the alliance, leaving only him and Ruoqing at home. When he sat in the courtyard, Ruoqing brought a cup of hot tea over. Li Yi thought of something and said, if you want to go out or go to the brothel these few days, I'll accompany you. Don't go out alone. Those people from the holy religion were all lunatics. Li Yi was still a little worried that the Taoist nun would make a comeback and lay her hands on the people around him. Although the possibility of this was very low, he couldn't let them take this risk. Ruoqing looked at him with some worry and asked, did something happen? Prince Axian's residence was burned down. It was done by the people from the holy religion. I'm worried that they'll do something bad to you. Holy religion. Ruoqing was stunned and asked with some uncertainty, Prince Axian's residence was burned down by them. Li Yi nodded and said, I don't know how Prince Axian offended their heavenly empress, causing those followers to go crazy and take revenge. But he deserved it, Ruoqing said in a low voice, that heavenly empress should be very powerful. I don't know if she's powerful in other places, but her martial arts are quite powerful. The influence of the holy religion can't be underestimated either. If we were to go up against them, the imperial court would probably have a headache. Li Yi suddenly remembered that he still had the token of the holy sect. It was a token that said that he was under one person and above tens of thousands of people. If something happened to the Taoist nun one day, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was best not to have any contact with those people. Although it was true that the influence was very powerful, all of them had been brainwashed and were like terrorists. Just the thought of being surrounded by such people made him feel uncomfortable. Ruoqing asked in a probing manner, what if the imperial court captures that heavenly empress? There probably won't be a good outcome. Li Yi shook his head and said, the people from the holy religion are cruel and have probably done a lot of things to harm the imperial court. If the imperial court were to capture their heavenly empress, they'll definitely not let her off. When that time comes, there'll probably be a great commotion in the world. With the Taoist nun gathering such a huge power, no one would believe her if she said that she did not want to rebel. Since ancient times, there had been many such examples. When that time came, blood would definitely flow like rivers and corpses would be strewn all over the place. Ruoqing did not continue asking. She smiled and said, "The brothel has been very busy these few days. I'd like to go over and take a look." Since he had nothing to do at home, Li Yi stood up and said, "I'll go with you." After sending Ruoqing to the brothel, Li Yi and the sloppy old man found a quiet place to drink tea and watch the performance while waiting for her to finish her business. Miss Wan. Hello, Sister Ruoqing. Nice to meet you, Miss Ruoqing. As Ruoqing walked over, the performers in the brothel all bowed to her. They respected and appreciated her from the bottom of their hearts. She was the one who had changed the industry and allowed them, who had traveled from state to state and slept on the streets, to live the good life they had now. After walking into a room, she ordered, "Xiaoqi, go find Su Zheng and ask him to come over." "All right, I'll go right now." A young girl nodded and walked out of the door. Su Zheng was also very famous in the brothel. In the beginning, he had only been a beggar, doing some cleaning every day in exchange for porridge. However, because he was serious and diligent in his work, not fearing hardship or fatigue, he was later promoted to work in the brothel as an exception. Many people here knew of him. Not long later, a young man walked in from outside and gently closed the door. He turned around and suddenly knelt on the ground, saying respectfully, "Your subordinate pays his respects to the goddess." Ruoqing rubbed the area between her brows and said helplessly, "I've already said many times that I'm not your goddess." "You've got the wrong person." Su Zheng did not say anything else, but the respect on his face became even more intense. Ruoqing did not argue with him. She stood up, looked at him, and asked, Are you people from that holy religion?" "It's the goddess's holy religion." She clenched her fist slightly and asked again, "Prince Axane Manor, was it you people who burned it?" Su Zheng said solemnly, "He wanted to harm the goddess, so he must be punished." Her knuckles were slightly white, and her voice trembled slightly. "Then, the son of the assistant minister of works, those people, are also, all of them deserve to die for attempting to harm the goddess." Ruoqing sat back down on the chair somewhat weakly. Her face was pale as she mumbled, I'm not your goddess." Why are you?" The young man buried his head even deeper and said, "Your Highness, the authorities have already noticed our existence. The capital is no longer safe. For your Highness's safety, this subordinate suggests that we leave this place as soon as possible. Get out, Your Highness, please reconsider. Get out." She had always spoken softly and gently, but at this moment, her tone was so decisive and unquestionable. "This subordinate obeys," Su Zheng said respectfully. Without raising his head, he stood up and left decisively. She stared blankly at the empty room, then leaned over the table and sobbed softly. "Why me? Why now? I'm not the Heavenly Empress." When he saw Ruoqing again, Li Yi was startled. He looked into her eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" Looking at her appearance, it was clear that she had just cried. Ever since he had known Ruoqing, he had never seen her cry over anything. "It's nothing. I just read a script. It was too sad, so I couldn't hold it in." She smiled and shook her head. "Let's go home." "What script?" Li Yi asked in surprise. He suddenly felt a warm and soft touch on his hand. He lowered his head to look at it and subconsciously clenched it. He no longer cared about the script. He nodded and said, "Yes, let's go home." Chapter 958. The case of the burning of Prince Axayan's manor had exposed certain matters, causing the two yamens in the capital and the city patrol office, which were in charge of security in the capital, to be extremely careful. Fortunately, in the next few days, everything was as calm as before, and no similar malicious incidents occurred. The New Year's Eve dinner of the Lee family this year was undoubtedly much livelier than last year's. There was less Lin Wanru, but more Suemo and Ruoqing. Lin Wanru would often send letters, mostly about business matters. The Lin family's business was doing very well in the Qi kingdom. Not only did it involve the jewelry industry, but it was also flourishing everywhere. Of course, the Lin family's business was the Lee family's business. The two families were mutually beneficial, and it was a symbiotic relationship. When the two girls had just moved in, they were still a little unfamiliar with this place, but a few days were enough for them to familiarize themselves with everything. Even Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu had gotten along well with the servant girls of the Li family. Xiao Huan also had 2 more playmates. Usually, the servant girls of the Li family treated her as half a mistress, and they didn't dare to speak or do things too presumptuously. Gradually, she didn't play with them anymore. Friendship between women always came especially easily. Xiao Chui had a strange personality, and it was very easy for people to accept her. In just half a day, the wariness and resistance between the 3 of them disappeared without a trace. The first day of Jing He's 5th year was the long-awaited court conference. Li Yi woke up very early. This was one of the rare times that he didn't resist going to court because many major events were going to happen today. Some of them would be earth-shaking to the officials, to the people, and to the Jing kingdom. The sky was still dark. Other than some servants who needed to wake up early, most of the people in the manor hadn't woken up yet. Rui helped him iron his court clothes. Ruoqing came in with a bowl of porridge and said softly, "Have a bowl of porridge before you go. The court conference will go on for several hours. By the time you get back, it will probably be afternoon. You'll be hungry." Rui walked over and said helplessly, "Miss Ruoqing is a guest." "I'm sorry to trouble you to cook personally." Ruoqing smiled and didn't care at all. She said, "It doesn't matter. I'm used to getting up early. I used to make breakfast for Zuemo and the others first. There's more in the kitchen. When they wake up later, I'll ask someone to bring it over." Li Yi gulped down the bowl of porridge, leaving not a single grain of rice. Ruoqing habitually took out a handkerchief, wanting to help him wipe the rice off the corner of his mouth. She had just raised her wrist when she slowly retracted it. She picked up the bowl, smiled, turned around, and walked out. Rui walked over and helped him wipe the corners of his mouth. She said casually, "Miss Ruoqing is smart and virtuous. She is also a very good woman. In some ways, Ruoqing is very similar to my wife. The most similar thing is that she is virtuous." After nodding, Li Yi looked at the sky and said, "It's getting late." He reached out and pulled Rui into his arms. His lips gently pressed on her forehead. When he turned around, he waved his hand. "It's still early. Go to sleep for a while, my wife. I'm leaving." There was no snow in the winter of Jinghe 4th year, but it was undoubtedly colder than the previous winters. When the sky was slightly bright, the officials had already rushed to the palace gate one after another, ready to participate in this year's grand court meeting. On weekdays, the officials were required to be well-groomed. They couldn't wear too thick clothes under their court robes. Otherwise, they would be caught by the censors. It was unlikely that they would lose their position, but it would be a great humiliation. The morning wind was biting. For the officials who only wore a thin court robe, it was undoubtedly a great torment. Therefore, in front of the palace gate, there were countless officials rubbing their hands and stamping their feet. The censors turned a blind eye to this. After all, if they were to scrutinize them, their almost frozen snot would be considered as not caring about their appearance. Of course, there were also those who weren't cold. When Li Yi came over, he immediately saw the old generals in the crowd who were dressed like bears. The imperial court sympathized with the officials and gave preferential treatment to the elderly. For example, Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen didn't have to stand there and wait. They could only go in after the officials had entered the main hall. For example, these old generals didn't care too much about their appearance. It wasn't because the emperor was being merciful, but because the censors didn't dare to interfere. "Brat, why are you here so early today? I haven't seen you in court for more than half a year. I thought you wouldn't come today." This time around, Li Yi wasn't as warm to old General Shui. He was almost certain that these old generals were the first to know of the old emperor's decision. For so long, he and Emingzu had been deceived by their superb acting skills. Old General Shui patted his shoulder and sighed, "Sigh, brat, you can't blame us. There's no benefit in knowing about that matter too early." Li Yi shook his head and didn't dwell on this problem anymore. Since things had already come to this, there was no longer any meaning to what had happened in the past. At the very least, that person was Li Xian and not Prince Qi or Prince Xan. Speaking of the King of Qi, the King of Qi arrived. Today, the King of Qi was dressed in a particularly spirited manner, brimming with health and vigor. Wearing only a thin embroidered robe, he strode with his head held high, seemingly unafraid of the bitter cold. "Young people are really tough." Old General Shui shook his head and said, "Not like us old fellows. If we were to wear such thin clothes in such weather, we would be in trouble when we return." Old General Ma glanced at him and said, "You can't get hard now because you were the same as him when you were young." Old General Shui was enraged. "Old man Ma, who can't get hard?" Old General Ma said disdainfully, "Why don't you try getting hard? Why don't we have a competition?" "I'm afraid of you." Out of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court, there were probably only these two who dared to do this openly in front of so many officials. Most of the officials didn't care about who was tougher between the two generals. Their focus was on Prince Qi. "Your Highness, Prince Qi." "Greetings, Your Highness." "Your Highness, please." Prince Qi's arrival caused a brief commotion in front of the palace gates. The censors looked at each other and ignored him. That was then, and this was now. After today, the Prince of Qi would likely become the heir apparent, second only to one. Choosing to offend him at this time was not a wise decision. Prince Qi was beaming with joy. He was very satisfied with the results of his arrival. He liked the feeling of being fawned over by others. Now that the situation was settled, he could finally relax. However, he naturally wouldn't pay attention to those officials whose names he didn't even know. He walked straight ahead. In front of him was where the top officials from the 3 provinces and 6 ministries gathered. "Minister Yan, Your Highness, Prince Qi." The Prince of Qi cupped his hands towards the Minister of War, Yan Bing. Yan Bing cupped his hands in return, before turning to the Minister of Revenue at his side. With a smile, he asked, "Where is the tea house that Lord Qin mentioned last time?" Qin Huan smiled and said, "It's in Willow Alley." "If Lord Yan wants to go, why don't we go together after the court today? That would be great." Looking at the 2 ministers chatting happily, Prince Qi opened his mouth and closed it again. A trace of displeasure flashed across his face. Soon, a smile appeared on his face again and he turned to look at the other people. Before he could say anything, voices came from the crowd. "Ah, Lord Zhang, why do you smell so good? Did you secretly use your wife's perfume? You can smell it too. Lord Wei looks especially spirited today. Is that so? Is that thing really effective? What is it?" Lord Qi might not know, but Rui Workshop released a new product a few days ago, Rui Du. It's specially designed for men. It can refresh the mind, adjust emotions, relieve stress, reflect one's taste in life, and enhance one's charm. Is that so? There's such a good thing. I want to try it too. Prince Qi found that he had been ignored again. The officials who had been waiting quietly had suddenly started chatting. He had no way of interrupting them. With a gloomy face, he walked to his seat. Brother Chi. Greetings, Brother Chi. Greetings, Brother Chi. Prince Chi was the eldest among the princes, so they all bowed to him. Li Yi glanced at the Prince of Chi, who was surrounded like a moon surrounded by stars. Flabbergasted, he asked, "What are they doing?" Old General Shui said indifferently, "They probably think that Prince Chi already has one foot in the East Palace." "Where did you hear this from?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "How strange. How did Prince Chi already have one foot in the East Palace?" "Rumors are harmful." Old General Ma looked at Li Yi and suddenly turned to Old General Shui and said, "Old Shui, I think this kid has some of your demeanor when you were young." Old General Shui was furious. "Ma, how dare you scold me?" Chapter 959. Li Yi felt that he had to improve his judgment of people in the future. He should not make friends with people who were not decent, especially those who were old and frivolous. To discuss who was tougher in front of so many officials, it was clear that he had no sense of shame at all. He was so frivolous that he had no bottom line. It was important not to get too close to such people. Looking at old General Shui's humiliated expression, Li Yi sighed and said, "I feel that cooperating with the Wang clan in the military provisions business seems to be more suitable. The Wang clan is a big family with a lot of money and foolish people. How about this? I'll give you the dividends that the two generals deserve this month. Even if the business doesn't work out, we'll still be able to keep in touch in the future. Haha, I'm just joking." The military provisions business was a source of income for the clan. Old General Shui's countenance changed, and he put his arm around Fang Xingjian's shoulder, saying with a smile, "Among the younger generation in the capital. No, there's also the older generation. Among them, I admire you the most. We can discuss this." "Old fogey Shui, you were scolding me in a roundabout way just now, and now you're sticking to me. Don't you know shame?" Old General Ma threw a disdainful glance at old General Shui, walked over, patted Li Yi's shoulder, and said, "Li lad, you shouldn't cooperate with an ungrateful person like old fogey Shui for this kind of business. Kick the Shui clan out, and our Ma clan is willing to pay another 10,000 taels. Old fogey Ma, your clan is connected to this business because of me. Now, you want to get rid of me after I've outlived my usefulness. I'm going to kill you, you shameless old fogey. Li lad, don't stop me. Today, I'm going to let old fogey Ma know how many eyes Prince Ma has. Don't worry, I won't stop you. Please go ahead." Li Yi quietly returned to his seat, watching the two of them fight. He unintentionally turned his head and took a glance, noticing that there was a gaze on him. When Prince Axian had escaped from the fire, he had broken his leg. However, it had been reattached by the imperial physicians. Other than some slight difficulty in walking, it was not a big problem. His hair was burned, but when he tied it up and put on the crown, it didn't look much different. At this moment, he was standing among the princes, looking straight at her, not hiding the hatred in his eyes. Li Yi was a little puzzled. Wasn't the one who had set fire to Prince Axian's manor? Wasn't it that fanatical believer of the holy religion? Why did Prince Axian hate him so much? Had he ever offended him? I don't think so. He was clearly not the one who burned his house, yet he was still glaring at him like this. Li Yi glared back with a sharp gaze, and Prince Axian shivered. He could not help but take a few steps back and fall onto the ground. What happened to Brother Axian? Someone hurriedly went over to support him. At this moment, the palace gates suddenly opened slowly. The officials immediately shut their mouths and returned to their original positions. The opening of the palace doors signified the official start of the Grand Court Conference. A middle-aged eunuch walked out from inside and shouted loudly with a sharp and thin voice, "All officials request an audience." Li Yi's position was extremely close to the front among the officials. He walked through the palace gate and passed through a long passageway. Other than the sound of his footsteps, there were no other noises. When he walked into the hall and turned his head to look, the crowd was still so dense that he could not see the end of it. The Grand Court Conference was the one with the highest number of officials participating. Other than the officials and nobles in the capital, the local officials from various places would also be present. This was the only chance for most of them to be present in a year. Rewards, punishments, promotions, demotions, and demotions would all be in this conference. As usual, the old emperor arrived late. Li Yi noticed that the emperor's originally straight back was now completely bent. Rather than saying that he was sitting on the throne, it would be better to say that he was leaning against it. With his current physical condition, it was no longer suitable for him to participate in such an extremely tiring event. However, for an emperor, if he could not even participate in the annual Grand Court Conference, then there would be no meaning for him to be an emperor. Every year, the process of the Grand Court Conference was the same. This year, Emperor Jing did not speak much. Naturally, there were eunuchs who followed the procedure step by step. Other than a few ceremonial contents at the beginning, the one that lasted the longest and had the most people participating was the reports of the local officials and the various departments of the court. The local officials needed to report on the tax revenue, population, economy, education, and other conditions under their jurisdiction. This was related to their promotions and examinations in the coming year. This year, the 6 ministries had vigorously implemented reforms. Naturally, they had to report on the results of this year's reforms. Li Yi patiently listened for nearly 4 hours. The changes that the Jing kingdom had achieved over the past few years could be described as earth-shattering. Regardless of whether it was politics, economy, or military, they had all made significant progress. Of course, almost all of these matters had been decided upon after detailed discussions between him and Mingsu. Achieving such results was within his expectations. He casually glanced ahead and saw Li Xian in the crowd. Compared with the high-spirited Prince of Qi, Li Xian seemed a little listless. At some point, he raised his head and looked at Li Yi. His eyes were slightly empty. Li Yi looked away and no longer looked at him. For Li Xian, this was indeed a cruel thing. However, his identity and status had doomed him to bear this burden. In the world of adults, there was no such thing as easy. Either you change the world or you change yourself. After many officials finished their reports, as usual, they had to announce some major events. This was also what everyone was most looking forward to. All signs indicated that the position of the Eastern Palace would be settled in this Grand Court Conference. After the last official retreated, the eunuch looked back. After receiving a signal, he slowly turned his head and said loudly, "Bring the sinners of the Cui family here." In the main hall, the hundreds of officials stepped aside to make a path. They watched as the palace guards escorted a few people up and made them kneel in the hall. They were incomparably familiar with these people, because just a few months ago, these people were just like them, sitting in the same court. Perhaps they had even argued about certain matters, but now, these important figures of the Cui family, who were once extremely powerful, were kneeling in front of them just like that. The eunuch cleared his throat and read, "The Cui family plotted to murder the prince. Their evil intentions are punishable. They brought disaster to the court and caused chaos among the people. Their crimes are too numerous to be listed. If we don't kill such evil people, we won't be able to appease the anger of the people. If we don't kill them, we won't be able to comfort the people." Cui Qingze, Cui Qingming, Cui Qingduo, and 13 others have committed the most heinous crimes. They will be beheaded as a warning to others. Cui Xian will be deprived of the title of imperial concubine. She will live in Yeding forever and will not be allowed to leave the palace. Chui Ming, Chui Xian, and 26 others will be exiled 1,500 miles. Chui Zheng, Chui Jian, the case of the Chui family, which was tantamount to treason, had already caused a sensation in the capital several months ago. Although it had been quiet these days, everyone could predict the final outcome of the Chui family. But no one had expected that His Majesty would announce the results of the case at the Grand Court Conference. Several important figures of the Chui family could not escape death. Most of the others were also exiled and would not be able to return to the capital in this life. Imperial concubine Chui was in the cold palace and would not be able to come out for the rest of her life. Although there was no mention of how to deal with the king of Shu, his actions were already equivalent to defection. Once he appeared, he would definitely be surrounded and suppressed by the court. It was really a pity that the once powerful Chui family had ended up like this. Chapter 960. However, the Chui family had only themselves to blame for such a result, so no one was surprised. Because the crimes they committed were too serious. They plotted to kill a prince, the legitimate son of the emperor. In order to let the king of Shu ascend the throne, they killed the two princes of the empress. They didn't stop until the birth of the eldest princess. The empress couldn't bear another child and no one could shake the position of the eldest son of the king of Shu. The Chui family and imperial concubine Chui used such cruel means to ensure that the king of Shu would ascend the throne. They probably didn't expect that the throne would eventually fall into the hands of Prince Qi, who they had never taken seriously. After the eunuch announced the result, the Chui family was taken away. Then, a few dry coughs suddenly came from the hole. The Chui family has committed heinous crimes, and it's not a pity that they finally got such a bad result. Prime Minister Qin walked out of the crowd, glanced down, and said, "You all know that the Chui family is insane. In order to establish the position of the eldest son of the king of Shu, they secretly killed the two princes of the empress. However, I'm afraid you don't know that the third child of the empress was also a prince, right?" As soon as the words came out, the officials were in an uproar. What? Prime Minister Qin, are you serious? How is that possible? The third child of the empress is obviously the eldest princess. Yes, I still remember that the empress and Princess Ning gave birth at the same time. Princess Ning gave birth to Crown Prince Li Xian. The empress, the uproar lasted for a long time. Even the censors did not stop them, because they were deeply shocked and incredulous after hearing Prime Minister Qin's words. Gradually, the uproar subsided. Finally, someone found some clues. The empress and Princess Ning gave birth at the same time. The empress gave birth to the eldest princess, and Princess Ning gave birth to Crown Prince Li Xian. Prime Minister Qin said that the empress actually gave birth to a prince. Prime Minister Xin, the ministers of the 6 ministries, and several other officials in the court looked calm, as if they had already known about it. County Marquis Li and several old generals, who were most trusted by His Majesty, were also not surprised. Most importantly, when Prime Minister Qin said these words, His Majesty did not stop him. Thinking about it, the Empress had lost 2 princes. If His Majesty didn't have any doubt in his heart, it would be unreasonable. Thinking deeper, why did Ning Wangfei come to the capital when she was about to give birth? Why did the Empress also move out of the imperial palace at that time and move with Ning Wangfei? The more he thought about it, the more he thought about it. In the hall, the doubts on the faces of the officials gradually disappeared. The various princes appeared astonished. Prince Axian's countenance turned pale, and Qi King's body trembled, unable to stand steadily. Prime Minister Qin spoke again. Back then, Her Highness lost 2 princes in succession. His Majesty already had some doubts, but the Chui family was powerful. Not only could they stir up the court, but they could even directly intervene in the court. In order to protect the princes, His Majesty made such a decision, His Majesty handed the princes over to Prince Ning and brought the princess back to the palace. Until now. Prime Minister Qin took out a box from his sleeve and said, "This is the Jade Archive that proves the identities of the two princes. If any of you don't believe me, you can come forward and verify its authenticity. Whenever a member of the royal family was born, their identity Jade Archive would be engraved at the same time they were born. If this Jade Archive was really from 20 years ago, then Crown Prince Li Xian was the princess of the first line." What Prime Minister Qin had said would naturally not be false. A few senior officials walked forward. After carefully verifying the Jade Archive, they nodded slightly and silently retreated. At this point, the officials no longer had many doubts. With the deaths of the first two princes, His Majesty grew suspicious. In order to protect the third prince, he exchanged him with Ning Wangfei's remaining daughter. Therefore, Crown Prince Li Xian was actually the legitimate son of His Majesty and Her Highness. Princess Royal, it should be called Princess now. At this moment, the eunuch cleared his throat and continued, "For the past 3 years, I have been ill for a long time. Thus, all the government affairs have been decided by Emingsu. As a woman, Emingsu has been in charge of the important affairs of the court. She has been working hard day and night and has never been tired. Therefore, I hereby grant her the title of Princess Yongle." It was not uncommon for a princess to be granted the title of princess. In the past few decades, there had been a few princesses who had been granted the title of princess due to their favoritism. Putting aside the degree of Princess Mingju's favoritism, she had contributed greatly to the court, the people, and the Jing kingdom. A mere title of princess was nothing at all. After reading an imperial edict, the eunuch picked up another one. With a solemn face, he said loudly, "Since ancient times, the emperors have inherited the heavens and ruled the world. They must establish the crown prince and prolong the country. My legitimate son, Li Xian, is a heroic and extraordinary person. Following the will of the heavens, I hereby abide by the first imperial edict and submit to the public opinion. I solemnly inform the heavens and the earth, the ancestral temple, and the country to confer the title of Crown Prince and appoint him as the Crown Prince in the East Palace. I have been ill for a long time and cannot be neglected for too long. I hereby appoint the Crown Prince, Li Xian, as the leader, to hold the imperial seal and establish the government hall. Princess Yongle will be his assistant. The two of them will manage the affairs of the commoners and supervise the country. All the matters reported by the officials will be decided by the two of them." Thump. As soon as the eunuch finished his words, Prince Qi's face turned pale. He trembled and collapsed on the ground. Then, the entire hall fell into absolute silence. Almost everyone had a look of contemplation on their faces. No one spoke. 2 imperial edicts and 3 matters. Princess Yongle had just become Princess Yongle and was given the title of princess by His Majesty. The title remained the same, but the meaning was completely different. Li Xian, the legitimate prince whom His Majesty had entrusted to Prince Ning many years ago, naturally became the crown prince and entered the East Palace. The third matter was also the most important. The crown prince supervising the country and the eldest princess assisting the government. This was something that had never happened in previous dynasties. It was also the first thing they thought of and felt incredible. But when they thought about it carefully, they felt that it couldn't be more normal. The country and the court had long been inseparable from the eldest princess. If the eldest princess was a man, they would disobey the emperor's order and admonish her to death. They would let her sit in the position that should have been hers. However, she wasn't. This was already the best and most suitable ending. Crown Prince Li Xian was the legitimate prince and also the most powerful one among all the princes of His Majesty. It was he who promoted the Academy of Science and made a great contribution to the country. But he only knew science and didn't know how to govern the country. He was not the most suitable person to sit in the position. Someone new. His Majesty gave the princess the title of princess again so that she could rightfully sit in the position and exercise the power of assisting the government. As for Prince Chi, flushed with success, the horse's hooves were swift, the horse accidentally lost its footing. It turned out that from the beginning to the end, Prince Chi had never touched that position. He didn't do it before and he wouldn't do it in the future. As for why they thought that Prince Chi was already on the throne, Li Yi felt that many people were looking at him with unkind eyes. He felt as if his back was being pricked by needles. He slightly tilted his head and asked the Minister of Revenue beside him, "Lord Qin, why are they looking at me?" Qin Huan looked at him for a long time and finally couldn't help asking, "I'm also very curious. Why did Lord Li accept Prince Chi's gift?" Li Yi thought for a while and said, "He sent it to me. Isn't it a little impolite to return it?" You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.